And good evening, everybody, and welcome to the interview room. We are so grateful that you're all here with us tonight. I'm going to put the really smart people at the top, and I'm going to stay down here in the lower squares of, the program this evening. We're so grateful that each of you have taken your time to be with us tonight. Man, have we got an amazing program for you. We are going to approach this subject this evening from not only the best in the world, world renowned. With us this evening, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner here, is Dr. Ann Burgess. And if you don't know Dr. Ann Burgess, which is going to be surprising that you wouldn't, she is a renowned pioneer in the assessment and treatment of victims of trauma and abuse. She's also a professor of psychiatric mental health nursing at Boston College Cornell School of Nursing. And she's a professor emerita of the University of Pennsylvania. And Ann is one of the original members of the FBI's Mindhunter team. In fact, they made an entire program about Ann's life and movies, many movies. And her work with the Behavior Science Unit at the FBI Academy is featured on a Netflix series called Mindhunter, where the fictional character Dr. Wendy Carr is based on Ann's life. She is literally a living legend, having won many awards and accolades, and she was named a living legend by the American Academy of Nursing in 2016. And if you have not gone and gotten her book, it is called A Killer by Design, Murderers, Mindhunters, and My Quest to Decipher the Criminal Mind. This is a must-read, everybody out there. It is a must-read. This book will blow your mind. And so you can get it on Amazon. It will be in the links below, of course, in our program. So without further ado, Dr. Burgess, thank you so much for carving out some time tonight.
Thank you, Chris. Delighted to be here.
Got another one. She's got another one coming, right?
Yes, you have another book coming.
Yep, September, Expert Witness.
Expert Witness, and was your experience with?
Court, testifying on these cases.
Awesome. Amazing. And I'm going to break down what these two above me here, myself, we're going to talk about this evening, but it wouldn't be appropriate unless I gave Dr. Gary Brucato a formal bio read here. He's a visiting scholar at Boston College, where he collaborates with Dr. Ann Burgess and Dr. Victor Petreka on forensic research. They have examined crimes such as murder, including serial killings, SA offenses, mutilation, dismemberment, and the insanity defenses. And you guys are also working on some research. I'm not going to tip my hat completely, but it deals with the missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is really exciting to hear, because I can only imagine what that's going to unveil. Dr. Brucato is currently a consultant on a grant-funded project with Ann and Victor, unless that has expired by now, but analyzing murders involving asphyxiation, strangulation, and other types of means. He studies How Violent Thoughts and Actions Emerge in Psychotic versus Non-Psychotic Persons. That's why he's a friend of mine, because he's been studying me for a couple of years at least. And I fall in the latter category for the record. He is also the co-author of the Columbia University Mass Database, where he holds over 116 years?
119 years of data.
119 years of mass murder data. I mean, can you
Kohberger's
imagine?
in there.
Go ahead, say it again.
Kohberger's in there. He's a mass murderer.
Kohberger is in there. Okay. And if you have not picked up his book, he's the co-author of The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. And it was written also with Dr. Michael H. Stone, God bless his soul, who's since passed. But the two of them did this book together in collaboration. And this is also, if you have not gotten this, boom, pow, zoink, as they would say from Batman. This is also another must read, and it is sitting, the link is sitting down at the bottom. And I am honored to be a member of the Cold Case Foundation with each of these amazing human beings doing such good for the world. Okay, wow, we've got a dilemma here tonight, because I want to break down 3 personality types for our audience and allow them to participate as well by asking questions. Now that Bryan Kohberger is no longer alleged, homicide suspect, he has actually admitted to killing all 4 of these college students. So I went back and I looked when we were all together with Greg Cooper and Dean and all of us, the 3 of us, when we all talked about his personality type, of the type of person we felt would have been that guy. And Gary, you laid out some things that not only came to be, prophetic in nature, but it was really quite fascinating. And so now the second question is coming up, I think, where many people are starting to ask, well, he didn't talk about it. He didn't say he said he did it, but he's not laid out the who, what, when, where, and why. And so that's leaving this gap out there. We've got books coming out. We all know there are going to be books written about his life. There are going to be movies. There's a new movie coming out in Peacock at the end of the month, which I bet you is going to be fantastic. I know Patterson has a book coming out. I bet you that's going to be fantastic. But there's some variances in relationship to where does he fit? Where does Bryan Kohberger fit? And so I want to kind of take that question on tonight because I want to compare 3 separate personalities this evening. Bundy, put your seatbelts on, everybody, because we're going for a ride. Okay. Ted Bundy, Elliot Rodgers, and Bryan Kohberger. Okay. Now, these are all 3 extremely interesting personalities to date. They are mass murderers. They are serial killers in terms of the definition, but more so, Ted is kind of like the leader here, that he's really the serial killer. Am I right or wrong?
Well, Chris, what's fascinating is that what you have on the screen is a serial killer, a spree killer, and a mass murderer. 3 completely different categories, according to the crime classification manual that Ann co-wrote, right? Because Bundy's responsible for scores of murders separated in time by cooling off periods. The Elliot Rodger that's up in the upper right is a spree killer because he kills the roommates by stabbing in one location and then travels elsewhere to commit more murders against women. And then with Kohberger, all we have, although I believe it was intended to be a fledgling offense and would have been a series of sexually motivated serial killing, I have no doubt of it in my mind. But right now, what it looks like on paper is that it was a mass murder. It would be like if they caught BTK after the Oteros.
The first murder.
You would have thought he was just a mass murderer, right? But of course, in my own work, I mean, I found that between 12 and 13% of serial killers commit a mass. The other way around. About 12 to 13% of mass murderers have previously killed or will kill again, and I think that's where he falls. But Anne, isn't that interesting how you got all three types there on the screen?
Right. Yeah. All three of them. Absolutely. Yeah. Mass, spree, and serial. Yep.
Now, what is a high level, easy way for the audience to understand each of these particular categories that we just mentioned?
Well, what separates out, I think what Gary said is what separates the spree from the serial is it has to move, that the person moves. They don't kill all in one location. And that's exactly what Rodgers did. He was at his apartment when he killed his roommates. And I think they were male, if I'm correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then he left. I don't know how far he had to travel to the sorority house, which was really the target of a lot of his grievance young women, and tried to get in, was barred from it. I think that was very interesting. And so went to the street and killed some young females. Is that right, Gary?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
And but I think, Dan, just to clarify, I think what you mean is that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you mean is that what distinguishes spree from mass is that because you said serial, but I think you meant to say spree from mass is the same location versus right. Yeah. And of course, serial killing is distinguished because there are cooling off periods.
Right.
And I will tell you, good luck going into the literature, and I bet you've realized this too. When we did the mass murder database, we could not find in the literature a solid definition of how long constitutes a cooling off period. We went with a week. Some people say a month. Depending upon the definition of cooling off period, some serial killers have a spree quality. For example, Gary Ridgway, Richard Ramirez. What happens when the person is just running around killing a bunch of people and you don't have a clear definition of cooling off period? A lot of these people could be mischaracterized as spree killers, but their motives are different. And what definition do you use of cooling off period? How many weeks or months constitutes a cooling off period?
Yeah, well, it was what the behavioral science profilers did. And there had to be enough time here. See, what we didn't, I'd have to go back and look at our data. But the important question would be, what did they do between killings? And we don't have, I still have all their interviews I could see, but that would be very important. Did it matter if it was only a few hours or a few days or a month or a year? What made the difference? My hunch would be as long as the fantasy kept quite, active, if you will. And then when it starts to wane, they have to go out and do something again, is my hunch.
Yeah. Well, the reason I think it's so interesting is that my sense has been, although I have not empirically looked at this, so just take this as a general observation, is that in serial killers who keep going out repetitively and killing, it seems that the offense, the thing that has upset them, can be something from a really long time ago, and so they keep going out and playing it out over and over. I've called that the prototype, right? In my work, so they have this prototype, and they go out and they find these surrogates that stand for that thing. But with spree and mass murders, it's usually that something more proximal has happened. Like, I lost my romantic partner a week ago. I lost my job. I lost my school. And the person then goes out. And it's interesting that with the serial killers, it seems you have the long-standing issue, but then some proximal event becomes the thing that makes you act on that long-standing hurt. And that's very important because I think it helps distinguish the personalities of these people. The fascinating thing is that all three of them are variations on the theme of being furious at women for different reasons. And, so it's like you've got misogyny at the core, And all three of them, I believe, I've got to look at Rodgers, but certainly pornography figured in also, certainly with Kohberger and with Bundy. But that's another piece of this too. But I think, Ann, we would agree that some variation on the theme of being mad at females is present in all three of these guys.
Right. But if you're looking at the time between killings,
Yeah.
don't forget on Kohberger, and this may go for the others, they didn't catch him for what, 6 weeks? So he's able to keep watching the newspaper, listening. He was in school. So there was a lot going on for discussing over this case. So but look at the Rodgers, of course, suicided. So he planned that. I must have planned that rather than, I'm going to see if I can get away with it. He killed in a way that there's no way he was going to get away with it.
So
and Bundy too. Bundy picked strangers and was able to follow some of the killings in the media.
Now, Ann, you had mentioned, I've heard you have mentioned that I want to talk about just briefly, and maybe Dr. Brucato chime in, about 20 years ago, the terminology that came into the industry, when I say industry, crime and criminology, et cetera, was the verbiage incel.
Right.
And it was actually introduced by a woman, not a man.
Right. Up in Canada. Right.
In Canada. So can you kind of give us, maybe Gary or Ann, whoever, kind of give us an idea of what that means? What exactly does that mean?
You want me to tackle that, Ann, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Well, incel is an abbreviation for, it's an abbreviation of involuntary celibate. And the center of it is the idea that a male, generally a male, almost always a male, feels that he is essentially rendered celibate by the extreme difficulty he has acquiring the interest of women. And it basically led to an online community of people complaining, joining forces to kind of kvetch about how upset they are about this. And it is associated also with hatred of the males who are more successful with women. And that's very important because in typical misogyny, if you become a murderer, you might just target women. But an incel may also be so angry at the males that they may also be killed, like we saw in Elliot Rodger, or the incident where Elliot Rodger tried to throw somebody off a balcony at a party, so that you have this kind of resentment also. So the key to it is the individual who feels trapped in a life where they are alone because they feel unattractive. Now, what's interesting about it that no one ever talks about, but I think is important, is that there's this additional element where the person has to believe that people are too stupid to see how fantastically attractive they are. So there's a sort of arrogance in there too. So it's not like a person who says, I'm alone, but I kind of get why. It's a person who says, I'm alone because these people are too dumb to realize I'm beautiful, that kind of thing. And you saw that with Elliot Rodger, sitting and looking in the mirror and talking about how, fantastic he thought he was. So, Ann, don't you think that's an interesting little element they seem to leave out, is the narcissism of, I can't believe people don't think I'm gorgeous.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. That is a great definition, Dr. Brucato. And am I off base by thinking that really in our time of social media, 20 plus years ago, that it was a terminology that kind of germinated itself into the social media environments and not necessarily coming from the offenders themselves, kind of like where your research has been, Ann and Gary, where you've actually gone in, interviewed the offender, and that then typology of that offender kind of emerges inside of those types of conversations. Whereas the terminology incel is kind of almost a society definition of somebody who is purposely,
Right.
evading relationships, essentially, right?
Well, it's very interesting, Chris, because an insight that I could give from having interviewed people who identify that way. I've had a few in front of me. And there is a feature of them that, again, I've never seen anybody write about, but I think is really interesting. I think Anne will find this interesting too, is that because they almost long for the days when what made a man desirable was not his appearance, but that he was the provider in a marriage or in a relationship, so that he didn't have to be physically attractive, right? So a lot of these guys have a feeling of resentment towards the progress women have made. So their feeling is like, let me be the man, even if I'm not particularly attractive, I could be the breadwinner. And that's very intriguing when, for example, we come to see incidents in the life of, let's say, Kohberger, where we find out that he had a kind of resentment towards women who were in power or were educated or whatever, and attempted to know more than he did, and so forth. And I think we're going to see that for Kohberger, the world was divided up into women who had, remember he told the date, the beautiful birthing hips, versus women that he saw as sexually objectifiable. And I think that's how he saw it, right? That you either had a use to the man and you were kind of an object to him that could be controlled or owned or dependent upon him, or you were essentially objectified and unworthy of life. And it is not unusual for that type of offender to have that idea that they resent the progress women have made. And you find out that a lot of them in secret hold a lot of ideas like we should all go back in a time machine to when women were in the kitchen, that kind of thing. And does that surprise you that the incels I've spoken to feel that way?
Well, I don't know what he's saying about it. I know that he had a lot of experiences where he was not accepted in his whole law enforcement attempt, trying to get in. And so I don't know how many women were involved or whether these were more male. So what I find missing is what he did. Did he date? Did he try to do anything? How did they deal with him?
I'll talk about that. I know some info on that.
Yeah. So I don't know how much we have of information.
Actually, that's a good segue, Dr. Burgess, because one of the things this student here has done for the two professors is I've created a behavioral analysis flow chart here for us. And by the way, if you're just joining us, this is Dr. Ann Burgess, Dr. Gary Brucato. They're famous. So I'll just leave it at that. And the idea, we've got 3,100 people in here right now, and the crowd is growing, which is a great thing, because I think it's important for folks to understand the three personality types that did he, because at the end, I want to answer the question. If he emulated somebody who was closer to him in terms of personality style, who was he, enamored with, et cetera. So the first thing I did here, and I broke it up into, subcategories. The first one is academic interest in criminology. And what we're going to do is I'm going to just read these definitions, and then we're going to, the next one, the next slide that I have, which is this slide, is I'm going to give his profile and then et cetera right into Rodger. So, and stop me at any time to really highlight some of these principles here. Academic interest. He showed a particular fascination with Ted Bundy, searching him online and reportedly emulating his appearance, i.e. wearing a black hoodie like Bundy in a video. Photos on his phone and digital footprints appear to be obsessed with Bundy. Crime execution. Kohberger entered a student's house at night, killed 4 victims with a knife, and left a DNA-laden sheet, suggesting boldness but potentially carelessness. His phone connected to a nearby cell tower 23 times over 4 months at least always after sunset, indicating premeditation and reconnaissance. Social behavior. Described as socially awkward, intense, and off-putting, Kohberger made others uncomfortable, i.e., persistently questioning of social events, at social events, clashing with peers, etc., the dates for the birthing hip concept, etc. He reportedly tried to charm women, but lacked genuine social finesse. Psychological traits. Kohberger may be a potentially psychopath, citing his lack of empathy and emotionless courtroom demeanor. A thumbs up selfie taken hours after the murder suggests detachment and grandiosity. His defense mentioned possible autism. However, that thought was contested as a sympathy potential tactic. Online and post-criminal behavior. Kohberger searched for Bundy and non-consensual essay materials, i.e., forced, drugged, etc. And that was really bad stuff. We know that.
Well, Chris, there was women who were asleep, and this is very important because for necrophiles, of which Bundy was, it's interesting that one of the ways they sort of get around that they can't find that material is they look for P, and we won't use the word, right, where the women are asleep. As a matter of fact, one of the women who dated Bundy has said that in the bedroom, he would have her pretend to be dead, right? And she would basically pretend she was asleep or that her eyes were, but with the eyes open. And that was arousing to him. So I think that it's all about control and domination of a body, a person who's sort of like a marionette, right? But I think it's extremely important. I mean, Ann, I don't know if you'd agree that I think.
Okay, but before you go too deep there, I only have one more paragraph.
Oh, okay, all right.
And then I want you to
come back to that. Yeah.
I'm just going to say, go, and the rabbit's going to be loose, and the horses are off. Okay. Okay. Before and after the murders, he returned to the crime scene hours later, called his father, and continued academic studies, indicating a compartmentalization capability. Motive. It's still unclear. No overt sexual assault was reported from the DA, who mentioned that. However, an undertone showed and suggested a possible power-driven or thrill-seeking motive with sexual inadequacies potentially at play. Okay.
Agreed.
And go.
Well, Ann, what I was getting at is I think you'd agree that the particular P that he was looking at tells us a great deal about his fantasies having something to do with dominating somebody completely helpless who can't reject him, that he controls, because they seem to be women that are drugged or asleep with the potential of being aroused by the idea that they're dead. And so, I mean, I'm curious what you think. I mean, this is an area of great authority of yours. I mean, what do you think that tells us about him psychologically? I mean, those are strange choices for arousal.
Well, that's one theory. I don't think we have enough at this point to know whether that's something. I mean, I'm thinking of someone like a Kemper that kills quickly because he doesn't want them to suffer. And then he does whatever. But I mean, he has a different reason. So we don't know on Kohberger. I think what's very unusual about Kohberger, and I don't know any other cases, is where there are 4 victims. I still go back to basics. And did he know that there were 4? Did he, I mean, that's a lot of people to kill in a very short time. And so was he prepared to do that? Was that part of the fantasy? We don't know. It's not like someone goes in and watches. A lot of these killers talk about going in, getting comfortable with the scene, looking around, and then leaving. He doesn't do that as far as we know.
No, but Ann, what do you think of the revelation, though, that after he had killed Xana and Ethan, who were his victims 3 and 4,
Yeah.
he sat down in the room, and there is some speculation that, well, we know that he carved into Ethan's body. We don't know if that was post-mortem or when that occurred, but there was
It was post-mortem, Chris. It was post-mortem.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was
So-
stabbed in an artery and died with one stab.
Okay.
And then Kohberger sits down and carves into his hamstrings.
Okay. So, Ann, what are your thoughts with that new information presented?
Yeah, well, the ones that I can think of are someone like a John Jobert that clearly was cutting into the body and was also a biter, if you will. Was interested, has some of that same thing, and he did it because he was he claims he was curious about the inside of a body, kind of thing. Now, most people would go look in the anatomy book, not go to do something like this. So but we also know from Jobert, because we had the interviews, this started back when he was 5 and he wanted to, quote, eat his babysitter. So again, I make a plea for, we've got to find out what was in his head before, what the fantasy was and how much it matches, whether he was interested in, see, do we think that he knew that there was a young male in that room? He could have, because he could have been in the party room and watched all of this. I think it says he circled the room, 12 times, the area, Chris? Is that
23 times? Yeah, 23 times.
Yeah.
But I don't think he anticipated Ethan being there that evening. Ann.
Yeah, that's what, right. Well, do we have anything more than just our belief? Do we have any? No hard evidence.
They were pretty clear, and the prosecutor made a pretty overt statement that Kohberger went in there to kill Maddie.
Okay.
Person. As a fascinating little piece of information, the woman who rejected Elliot Rodger, that sent him into a tailspin, was also called Maddie. As just one of those little weird coincidences that kind of make you wonder, right? If it was like an homage of some sort. But that was also a Maddie. But what it looks like is he went in there to kill one, and then everything sort of went to hell. He didn't expect Kaylee to be there, and then the other, and then Xana interrupts him, and the sheath gets dropped, and then the male is in the room in the bed sleeping, and he kills the male, so that you wind up with this kind of explosion. But part of me has always thought that he had a serial killer-like quality to him, and I'll tell you why. First of all, we had trolling behavior. We know that on his phone were loads of conspicuously attractive women who looked an awful lot like the victims, right? So that you already have this idea of kind of having an idea in your mind of a kind of stereotyped person that's going to stand for a group that you're mad at, right? And then he ultimately hones in on someone. So you've got that. You've got the idea that there's this incredible premeditation where many months before he even has a victim, he's purchasing a K-bar. So that there's this, you have the fantasy before you even have someone casted to attack. He's thinking about it. We have the idea that he had paraphilic elements to the P that he was viewing, and the themes of it were domination, control, and manipulation of other people, particularly women. We have precipitating events that seem to put the fire under him, where he felt out of control with women. He was getting in trouble at school in his TA position because he was grading them unfairly and being overtly hostile to them, which is also interesting, right? And so the other thing is is that there is a serial killer who was all over his phone. He's researching Ted Bundy, right? And he is fascinated in his private life with this kind of division of the self thing, because we know that he was staring in the mirror and feeling fragmented and confused about this darkness that was taking over, and how he could look at people and feel nothing about them, and then gets drawn to Bundy. And what it seems to me is that he's in school, and on the one hand, he's sort of fighting demons, trying to battle this division, learn about it, work for good. and on the other side is getting sucked more and more into this and is furious at women, feeling isolated. No matter what he does, people think he's a weirdo, and you wind up, I think, ultimately with the darkness winning. And it's interesting that his professor, Dr. Ramsland, spoke about that also, that idea that you had this person who you're looking at him and you're thinking he could work for good, and then he winds up getting pulled in this other kind of direction. The question is, was he lying the whole time? Was he just a wolf in sheep's clothing? Or was he somebody authentically confused and fragmented? I think the attraction to Bundy is that compartmentalization, that he could by day be, some guy that is working on a helpline and convincing people and so forth, and is privately living this shameful life, this dark, perverse, secret life. I also think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Ann, but I think that one of the things that made him decide to finally cop to this was that his parents found out the truth about him. Dateline comes out, all the darkness of his perversions are out in the open. And I think they kind of said, we can't get on the stand and say, we don't suspect you, that there's nothing to this. We found out now. It's all out in the open. And I think with a lot of these guys, when the curtain lifts, it's almost a relief that now they can just admit that dark side. Now, I don't know for sure, but if I had to speculate, I think that the idea was to go in there, probably in imitation of Bundy, bludgeon the victim in her sleep, and take her somewhere. My guess would be that park that he used as the alibi. Fascinatingly, we know that there was a body found in that park he used as his alibi, which was attributed to Bundy. It's fascinating that Bundy was asked about that case on the day of his execution and refused to admit that it might have been his first kill. That's an interesting little homage that might have happened there. So my sense had been that he had intended to take the victim somewhere and engage in SA, although he was totally inadequate. And he probably was intending to experiment with her. He got cheated out of all of it in his mind. And so he took it out on Ethan. And I think that Ethan in his mind was a male who interrupted a perverse fantasy. Now, this is all what I think went on. But of course, I want to hear it from his mouth, because it may turn out that he says there was no sexual element to it at all. I just wanted to see what it felt like to kill someone. I was just curious, about it. I was studying it and I wanted to see what it felt like. So, Ann, we don't know, but do you agree that there are some signs there that we do see in people who are serial killers?
Well, yes, I would say that we do see that with some, but I need to go back and say, who is the targeted victim you think is Maddie, is the one that he, and so why does he go up one more flight?
That's where she is. That's where he goes, right to her room. He makes a beeline right to her room.
Okay, that's the third floor. And then he comes down and kills.
Because Xana interrupts him. So he goes into the room and discovers that Kaylee's in bed with the intended target. And then is interrupted by
Maddie.
And
then
Xana interrupts, it's theorized. So he goes down to the second floor, chases her down, kills her, and her boyfriend is asleep in bed. And so he is killed with one single blow of the blade. And then for when he should be getting out of Dodge and checking to see if he's got his sheath and everything else, he feels compelled in this kind of signature-ish way to sit down and mutilate Ethan.
And the sheath is left under who? Under
next
Ethan?
to Maddie. Next to Maddie upstairs.
On the third floor.
Interrupted him. Yeah.
On the third floor. So as soon as he comes in, he goes right to the third floor. And it's interesting that he parks behind the house, which we said he would. And her bedroom is really at the same level of that parking area behind the house. So basically she's in a fishbowl. So is Dylan, the girl on the second floor who survived. She is also in a fishbowl. Okay. So if we believe, which the evidence is showing that is very on target, that he had multiple times at this house in terms of the digital footprint where it appears he was surveilling the house, and the authorities just even the other day came out in court and said, yeah, there's evidence that he was surveilling the house, and we were prepared to present that.
Right.
So I want to, which is a great segue right into Ted's behavioral profile real fast.
Okay.
Charm and manipulation, right?
Mm.
Bundy was
Right.
highly charismatic, using his charm to lure victims, often posing as injured or trustworthy, i.e., faking a broken arm. He blended seamlessly into society, working at a suicide hotline and studying the law. Can you imagine picking up the phone on the suicide hotline and it's Ted Bundy on the other end? Hi, this is Ted. How can I help you? Man, what a creepy
Power
feeling.
over life and death. The big theme for him.
Well, there you go.
Maybe he did help him. We don't know, right?
I know. There we go. Right.
There's
Crime
the division
execution.
again. Yeah, the division between the sides of the self theme.
Okay. Staying with this behavioral analysis, Bundy's attacks were bold, often targeting women in public or semi-public spaces, i.e., the Chi Omega sorority house invasion, where he killed 2 women with a blunt object. He was initially meticulous in his original, early on crimes, but grew sloppier, leaving evidence such as bite marks and hair on victims, which ultimately led to his demise. Psychological traits. He was diagnosed as a psychopath. Bundy exhibited grandiosity, lack of empathy, and thrill-seeking behavior. His crimes were driven by a need for power and control, not always SA, though victims were often targeted for their appearance and then ultimately assaulted, both physically and SA. Academic interest. Bundy studied psychology and law, reflecting an intellectual fascination with control and behavior, like Kohberger's criminology focus. Post-crime behaviors. He revisited crime scenes, kept trophies, i.e., from his victims and possessions, and displayed confidence during trial, even representing himself. Confidence during trials, even representing himself. And we've learned now that Bryan Kohberger left the residence with some type of container in his arm, under his arms. I thought that was a really interesting piece of the puzzle. So we have all 3 personalities: a spree killer, serial killer, and what was the third one you
A
mentioned?
mass murderer.
A mass murder. Okay. So now I want to take a look at Elliot Rodgers, his behavioral profile. Social isolation and resentment. Rodger was socially awkward, deeply isolated, and harbored intense resentment towards women and socially successful peers, detailed in his 137-page manifesto, My Twisted World. He felt entitled to affection and statues, but was rejected. Now, what's interesting is, Anne, in some of your research, you recently published his manifesto and you discovered clusters of behaviors inside of that, correct? Against others.
Right. Yes, we did.
And we'll take a look at that at some point. Not
Sure.
tonight, but guys and gals in the audience here, I talked to Dr. Burgess and she said we can take a look at this. The next piece here, crime execution. Again, if you've just joined us, we're doing a comparative analysis, just a high-level overview. Rodger's attack was planned mass killing, targeting a sorority house and random victims via stabbings, shootings, and vehicular assaults. He prepared extensively, posting a YouTube video outlining his retribution and emailing his manifesto. His psychological traits. Rodger exhibited narcissistic and possibly autistic traits with extreme entitlement, misogyny, and victimhood complex. His manifesto revealed obsessive hatred and a desire to punish others for his perceived failures. Online activities. He was active on incel forums, expressing rage against women and Chads, successful men. His online presence was a key outlet for his grievances, culminating culminating in public declarations before the attacks. His motive, driven by rage against women who rejected him and men he envied. Rodger's killing were a public spectacle meant to assert power and infamy. He committed suicide after the attacks. Okay, so now I want to compare Kohberger to Bundy, the similarities and the differences. Okay. But before I do that, any thoughts on either two of these individuals?
Well, one thing I think gets overlooked with Rodger is that he had a father who was a movie director that he had an enormous envy of and a sense of being invisible to, I think. And the mother figure in his life, in his mind, favored his brother. And I think this manifested as, I'm jealous of the men, and the women don't pay attention to me because they're more interested in the other men. The reason I always thought that was interesting is that something that I think about a lot and I'm writing about is that we get so caught up in the sexual elements of these offenders that we forget to think about the object relations and the way they think about their stable objects in their life. For example, you can make an argument that when Bundy, was keeping bodies, that it was a way of stabilizing objects, that they were predictable. He always knew where they were because he had the rug pulled out from him in terms of the woman that he was idealizing leaving him, finding out that the woman that he thought was his sister was actually his mother, etc. So that this stabilization of objects figures into things for these people. I don't say objects to mean that they are things. I mean in the psychological way where we mean a person that you're incorporating into your psyche, right? A figure. Well, it's important to think about that because one of the common denominators in all three of these people is they could not stabilize their relationships. They couldn't make the world predictable in terms of what makes people like me or not leave me or find. And so they all found weird ways of doing that. And but I think it is really interesting to think about it that way in terms of, and that seems like something you would find interesting. Also, the formative relationships and how they play out in the crime.
Yeah, well, I'm always interested in the family background, and I think that in Rodger's case, the family was concerned about him and didn't he get some counseling? They were worried about it. It wasn't that they weren't aware of him. I think in Bundy's case, was there a father figure at all in the picture?
There was a man that had gotten his, the grandmother pregnant that became sort of like, an interesting life, something like that. Right. But it's important to understand, like Bundy, I think, had a kind of hereditary psychopathy. And even as a little boy, he was doing weird things. Like there was a time when a family member woke up and found that Bundy, as a little boy, had surrounded her bed with kitchen knives. He was a strange little boy. This isn't somebody who just like gets hurt and becomes bad. I think he had honest to God hereditary psychopathy from the time, and then got twisted in a bad direction by being angry at the world. But with Rodger, I agree. There's more of a pathetic kind of thing.
Yeah.
He was authentically disturbed and sort of slipped through the cracks, partly because I think he could never admit that anything was wrong with him. And Kohberger, I think, too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Kohberger is interesting because he had two older sisters, one of whom was a therapist, maybe both, I don't know, and a mother that was very interested in Bundy, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, I does he talk about Bundy at all, Kohberger?
Well,
that was kind of a surprise to me.
Well, he was certainly studying him intensely, and we know.
Yeah, sure.
And I know I have heard things about him being preoccupied with Bundy.
Okay.
This is where we don't know for sure because it hasn't been discussed.
Yeah, this is where it would be very interesting to see what he wrote, if he had any term papers he had to turn in when he was doing his master's work. I'd be very interested in that, because we always look carefully at student papers when they have to write a term paper, so that he wrote something on Bundy, something might have come through
What?
in terms that you could
Well,
interpret.
we know what was on page 118. Florida lady is asking
Well,
because
I don't know what book it was.
no, but his professor was subpoenaed. Remember?
No. These are two stories being mixed up.
Okay.
One story is that there was someone who had written an article about Bundy who was at Washington State,
Okay.
and he downloaded it and contacted that professor about that article. But then there is the professor, the subpoenaed person, who was overseeing his work, where he was like on Reddit talking to people about why they commit crime, but that had nothing to do with Bundy. The page 118, we can only speculate, but let's just say I would bet my life it's going to be a Bundy book, and we're going to discover that page 118, I have no doubt, is going to point us to some insight about the internal experience of Bundy, so forth. And I have a pretty good theory about what that book is and all that. But I think that the experimenting with strangers and asking them, did you commit a crime and what did you feel, is really fascinating. You remember, Anne, when Victor found the questions and we had to look at them? And
I have all the questions. Yeah, I think that's very interesting.
Well, doesn't it suggest, like I said, that there was a time when he was sort of trying to figure out why he was having such dark thoughts and this kind of sense of detachment and guiltlessness and all that he was curious about himself.
Yeah. How much it's almost how much is he similar to and how much is he different from?
Exactly. And we think that's the fragmentation that I think fascinated him.
But does he ever get any answers?
Not that we're aware of. I'm sure that there were answers, but the public doesn't know about them.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and everybody, we thank you so much if you're just joining with us. We're so grateful that you're here. 4,300 people in the chat. This is an amazing opportunity to listen to Dr. Burgess and Dr. Brucato kind of lay out some of our thought processes in relationship to the comparative analysis of three personalities, Kohberger, Bundy, and Elliot Rodgers. So continuing to move forward. And by the way, if you've put us, a chat or any super chat or anything like that, I haven't forgotten about you. They're all marked and they're up there. And towards the end, we'll dive into them. Okay. So I don't want you thinking I'm ignoring you. I'm not doing that at all. And please, I appreciate your understanding and your patience. So let's look at the similarities between Bundy and Kohberger, and then the differences between Bundy and Kohberger. First of all, the crime scene parallels. Kohberger alleged nighttime home invasions targeting college students with a knife mirrors Bundy's Chi Omega attack, where he entered a sorority home and killed with a blunt object. That's my little Jack Russell. Both used edge weapons and targeted young women in a bold, high-risk setting. His academic fascination. Both studied fields related to human behavior. Bundy's was psychology and law. Kohberger was criminology. With Kohberger's explicit researching Bundy behind the scenes suggested possible emulation or inspiration. And more of that will come out over time. Psychopathic traits. Kohberger's alleged lack of empathy, emotionless demeanor, and post-murder selfie aligned with Bundy's psychopathy, including his grandiosity and his detachment. Both left critical evidence. Bundy, bite marks, Kohberger, knife sheath, indicating potentially overconfidence in the crime scene. Premeditation. Kohberger's cell tower pings over months, suggesting planning akin to Bundy's scouting of victims and locations. Though Bundy's sprees were more extensive and, of course, wider in nature, i.e., across the various states. Motive and speculation. Neither crime appears primarily sexually motivated. Both may reflect a need for power and control, though Kohberger's motivation currently remains unclear, and we cannot take that off of the table, i.e. sexual drive. Dr. Brucato has some comments about that. I know he will. And Dr. Burgess. Differences now between Ted Bundy and Kohberger. Social skills. Bundy was charismatic, and it was central to his ability to lure victims, while Kohberger was awkward and lacked social charm, making him less effective at manipulating. Scale and pattern. Bundy was a serial killer with dozens of victims over years, while Kohberger is accused of one quadruple murder with no confirmed serial pattern. Public persona. Bundy maintained a polished facade, while Kohberger's social struggles and reported heroin use suggested a less controlled image. Okay. What are your thoughts about the two pluses and minuses?
Well, I have a lot to say, but Ann, let me let you
No.
go first.
Yeah. Well, the differences I think are clear. You had Ted Bundy being very charismatic. I don't see Kohberger falling into that category, but I don't know if any of you are going to comment on how different he looks now since then, that he has
eyebrows off.
Yeah, and a different hair style. Very different, of course, from Rodgers. But when you take that and compare it to some of the early ones, it's remarkable of what's gone on with him over this past 2.5 years. I still, anyone have any information on really what secured the plea deal? I know that they had the evidence, but if they hadn't had the DNA, they wouldn't have had all this other. So
Well,
that
there
takes
was
me back to that.
an eyewitness who came out
You think that, yeah,
after
okay.
arrest that may have twisted, and there's a theory of that he didn't want his parents testifying, and this is coming from Howard Blum and his
Yeah.
book, that he was saying that he was worried that his parents were going to have to testify.
Yeah.
But then there's some other stuff behind the scenes where they have not released any of the evidence just yet.
Yeah.
And my concern is when they do release all that evidence, it potentially could be overwhelming to the public. And I think even though we all want to see it, I think also at the other side of the coin, there's going to be a tremendous amount of respect for the family and the family's feelings. I'm curious of what he's going to do during the impact statements. I don't
Right.
see him. I don't see him really blinking. But what do I know at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, so staying with this theme here for a
Nope.
moment.
Yeah. I will.
Gary, what do you think? Anything? The similarities and the differences.
Well, first of all, when we think about offenders, particularly serial offenders, about half of them who have psychopathic features might be described as also having a kind of schizoid autistic detachment. That has nothing to do with autism. It just means that you have this weird interpersonal quality where you're sort of mechanical. You are interested in things like what's inside of a body, what happens when I do this to a body. As a matter of fact, a lot of people who commit torture, we think of them as being sadistic. Some of them are, and some of them are experimenting. For example, Robert Berdella was keeping notebooks about what he was doing to victims because he was fascinated with all the different things you could do with objects around the house and other things to a body.
Yeah, you could actually see an evolution.
You can see an evolution where they're intellectually stimulated, but it falls under torture, right? Now, I think the difference between Kohberger and Bundy is that Bundy was much more chameleon-like and charming, the kind of person who could talk you into a place where he could be alone with you or blitz you, whereas Kohberger lacked that. it reminds me of when Ken Lanning, for example, talks about the difference between child offenders, how there's the kind that can groom you because they have social skills, and the kind that just opens the car door and snatches you because they don't have social skills. And I think that's the thing with Kohberger, is he needed to attack people sleeping who were completely vulnerable, who couldn't see him, so forth, because there is this pathetic kind of socially awkward core, whereas Bundy knows how to sort of mimic the social graces and pretend that he's, you know, like everybody else. So that's a huge difference between them. What I think is in common between them is that both of them are harboring anger towards the instability of their objects, resentment that women are responsible for that, a sense that they're both so fantastic that people should accept them, and being mad about that, having extreme anger and grudges that they could hold for a long time, being very sensitive to changes in their life and how the structure of their days can sort of fall apart and then cause them to fall apart. Both of them used substances. In Bundy, it was alcohol. In Kohberger, it was the use of heroin. But both of them had that kind of need for something to kind of bind them and help them have a sense of control. And I also think that the other thing about both of them was a sense of being something of an imposter, who on the one hand is sort of thinking, maybe I could use my powers for good, you know, but is secretly harboring this dark side. I will tell you that, having been the co-author of the Columbia Mass Murder Database, which, you know, that you always point out, Chris, that's the largest study ever done of mass murder. I could tell you could count on a few hands the number of mass murderers who troll and, you know, do these other things that are serial killer like. Most mass murderers are not motivated by P that they're watching, for example. The average mass murderer, the average age is about in the mid-30s, mid to slightly late 30s, and which implies that it's not biological, right? It's not happening in teenage years or when you're going through certain changes in puberty or anything like that. And they're people who lack coping skills in the face of a life event, right? Most of them are not psychopathic. The ones that are a little more psychopathic are the ones that scheme and plot it for a long time. But most of them are just impulsive. They get overwhelmed. They take a weapon. They go out. They do what they do. The serial killer has far more malice aforethought, is motivated more by fantasy, and can keep doing it until the fantasy is perfected. They're not sated after doing it. Now, the problem is that because Kohberger was caught, we don't know where exactly his path lay. But the signs were there that he would have been somebody moving in the direction of needing to keep doing it, because he had a lot more of those kind of qualities. So I think let me put it this way. I think he wanted to be a Bundy, but he was a lot more like these schizoid kind of offenders, these more kind of schlubby, weird, odd, socially rejected types, like Kemper, to be honest with you, and who I think did have that detachment and thought of people like objects of study, right? Now, I will tell you, personally, as an academic, I understand people who have intellectualized detachment, right? I mean, Ann, we're surrounded by people like that. We're academics. That's what we do. We experience a kind of academic detachment and can sit around and talk about things, right? For example, when I was a little boy, my first word was hot. That was the first word I said. Why? Because my mother told me everything was hot, so I wouldn't break it apart to look at what was inside of it. That's a personality trait that I had even as a kid, and I'm like that to this day, right? I think academic distance is there. But with this guy, it's an academic distance which goes to the point of being able to think of a person like a frog on a dissection table. There's no feeling about it. And you saw that in the courtroom. And weren't you struck by how callous he seemed when they said, did you willfully kill a human being, and gave the name and so forth? And he just goes, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
Did you feel that detachment, or I'm curious what you felt about it?
Well, two things. One was he told what to say by his lawyer, versus was that a spontaneous thing? Because even when they asked the judge said guilty or not guilty, he was what we call monosyllable, guilty, 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 and said in a very I mean, I would have thought he might have felt bad about it and said it in a different way, but it was said in the same tone, if you will. I thought that was kind of interesting. So
That is extremely interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Do you think it's consistent with the possibility of him authentically being on the spectrum?
Oh, boy, I don't. You think it does put him on the spectrum? I don't think.
I think that
No,
there
I
is
don't think
I
so.
cannot diagnose him because I did not examine him. But I will say
No, right.
that
Yeah.
one thing that you use to tell apart autism and psychopathy is that autistic people, who are rarely violent, right? They're among the sweetest, most harmless human beings you will ever meet. I mean, I work with them as a specialty. They are not particularly adept at manipulating people because they
Right.
don't treat them in that way, right? And whereas Kohberger had more the quality you see in a psychopathic individual, where he seemed to be able to play everybody. He wasn't very good at getting a date, or making friends or so forth, but he could manipulate and control people, and enjoyed the feeling of sort of being above them or condescending to them or so forth. And I think he had that quality common with Bundy. I knew someone once. I talked to somebody who told me a story about Bundy that I had never heard, that I think is very revealing of his personality. And they said that when he was younger, he was able to slip into the coat room at a country club where all the rich, beautiful people were in town, and he put on the waitstaff tuxedo and then went out and milled among the guests to see if he could pass as a rich kid wearing a tuxedo. And he was really good at it. He was really, really good at it. And I love that story because it so perfectly illustrates the feeling of being an imposter and going, joke's on you, that kind of thing.
I love how Kohberger's personality is starting to evolve here now that we don't have to say allegedly anymore. I mean, he's done. He killed 4 people.
Yeah.
And what's going to be fascinating is one of the comments you made a while ago, Gary, about he is now in a position to correct everything. And some
lie.
of those and lies. So let's keep moving forward real fast.
Yeah, this is good. This is good.
We've got now. I want to do pluses and minuses to Elliot Rodger and Kohberger. So social the similarities, social awkwardness. Both Kohberger and Rodger were described as socially awkward and off-putting, struggling to connect with peers. Kohberger's intense demeanor and Rodger's isolation align in their social failures. Targeting victims. Kohberger's victims were college students, potentially evoking envy or resentment, which is speculative, my speculation. Similar to Rodger's targeting of sorority women and students he resented for their social success.
Mm-hmm.
Online activities, similarities. Kohberger searches for non-consensual inappropriate materials, and Bundy suggests a dark fixation, while Rodger's incel forum activity and manifesto express misogynistic rage. Both use the internet to explore or reinforce their mindsets. I think that's a really important piece of this puzzle. One was into dark, inappropriate materials, essay materials. The other was using it to express their disappointment with life, people, etc. I think that's an important piece.
Yeah.
Psychological traits. Go ahead, Doc. I didn't know if you want to say something.
No, I'm fascinated by the way you broke this down. I love it. Do
I get an A if I attend?
You get an A, and don't you think it's cool how
we'll give you an A.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. It's not my first rodeo. Remember, not my first rodeo. Okay, here we go. Psychological traits. Kohberger's possible detachment, i.e. post-murder selfie, and Rodger's narcissistic entitlement share a self-focused mindset. Though Rodger's explicit victimhood complex is more pronounced.
Yeah.
Premeditation violence. Both planned their attacks with Kohberger's cell tower pings and knife purchases mirroring Rodger's detailed planning and manifesto. Okay, now the differences. Motivation and ideology. Rodger's attack was driven by explicit misogyny and a desire for retribution against women and society, articulated in his manifesto. Kohberger's motive, although completely unclear, appears intense in attacking a house full of females with no evidence of similar ideology, vendettas, or public declarations. Crime style. Rodger's mass shooting was a public spectacle meant to maximize visibility, ending in suicide, while Kohberger's attack was covert with no manifesto or suicide, suggesting a different psychological drive. Scale and intent. Rodger aimed for widespread carnage to achieve infamy, while Kohberger's single targeted house incident lacks the public spectacle or stated intent of Rodger's spree. Online presence. Rodger's online activity was overtly expressive, broadcasting his rage, while Kohberger's searches were private and not explicitly tied to a broader ideology like incel culture. However, I should have added here, there is some evidence pointing that he could have been the puppet Papa Rodgers. And we talked about that last night on The Lab. If anybody didn't see that, go to the channel, The Lab with Josh Diaz, and we broke that piece of the puzzle down. Okay. What say you two docs about similarities, differences between Elliot Rodgers and Bryan Kohberger?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up with what you just said on the online presence and that Papa whatever. I got an email from a nurse that's been following this pretty carefully, and there's some real, maybe not just speculation, that he Kohberger was following the your show or other shows, and which we had always we had talked about. Remember, Gary, we had talked about that. Do you think they're watching or whatever? Now that's something that he was able to do because he hadn't been caught. But certainly Rodgers making the decision to suicide. Now this is also, what year are we talking about for Rodgers? I forget. It's a good decade ago, isn't it? At least.
Yeah, I think it was 2016.
Yeah. So I don't think that the online thing was as popular.
I think it was 2014, but I've got to look.
14.
Yeah, I did.
16.
Yeah, I think he killed himself at 14 in 2000. I'll look if you want.
Yeah, and I think the other that you got, Chris, is he had Rodgers had made the decision to suicide. Obviously, not in either Bundy or Kohberger.
Too grandiose to kill themselves.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I
like that though. Looking at similarities and differences, I think that you could probably do it with other killers too, comparing Kohberger. Okay.
Do either of you think that Bryan would have kept on going had he not been captured?
Yes. Next question. Absolutely. Everything about him pointed in that direction.
But
I think, I mean, come on. But because he was so clearly motivated by psychosexual fantasy from what he was viewing privately, that why would he have been sated by one murder that didn't even go well? But this is the thing. It's very interesting that Elliot Rodger, despite being furious that he could not get a sexual partner, did not think, let me go in and force someone to engage in that activity, because ultimately he's like a complete. I think first of all he wanted somebody to want to. That's the whole thing. I think he would have felt to him like, I want to win someone over. I want to be attractive enough. If I make you do it, it doesn't serve the need of gratifying the ego in that way. But I also think that he was totally inadequate. I think that even if he had found a partner, he would have been totally inadequate. I think that Kohberger is also a completely inadequate personality. I think he thought that he'd be able to do something, but I have a feeling that even if he wasn't interrupted, I'm not so sure he would have been able to. I always thought that the choice of the knife was like a kind of a sexual substitute. And that's something that Anne picked up on when we first were doing that profile with Greg and Dean and you and me, is the idea that when there is not an overt sexual quality, it's sometimes subtle in the choice of weapon, in the idea of dominating and controlling, the fact that there are these conspicuously attractive young women who are being targeted. There are undertones to it that have a sexual flavor. And you remember when we talked about that, about how it could be sexual without being overtly so?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and do we agree there are undertones in the Kohberger case that feel like it was about women, and that the stabbing and so forth has that undertone to it? Or we don't see that the same?
Yeah, a knife as the weapon of choice. Well, he was limited in what he could take. He certainly couldn't take a gun. Make too much noise, right? He wouldn't get away with it. So I think a basic part of the fantasy is I'm going to be a super mass murderer. And so I'm going to do 4 at once. But see, I still don't know whether he had planned. He thought he'd have the 4 victims. What if he had only had 1? What if Maddie had been the only one there? Might he not have killed her? Like you were talking a little bit earlier, might it have been we certainly have plenty of cases where the intruder comes in the middle of the night and rapes the victim, wears a mask, so there's no identification. I try to think of all the other, but then he encounters another victim, 2 of them. What's he going to do? How fast does he have to switch to?
Right. Yeah. So I just want to throw a wrench into that thought process of, he spent a couple of months coming and going to that house. He had to know there were 5 women staying in that house. And so I love your thought process, Dr. Burgess, about, if he goes into that house with just 1, I agree that I think that there's a high probability that Maddie is his primary target.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also struggling with, why does he choose why did he pick that house? I don't think it was just for Maddie. Because Bundy didn't pick the sorority house in Florida just for 1 victim. He ended up, going room to room.
Yep.
And victimizing. And then we have this evidence that says, the purchase of a knife, for an example. Elliot Rodgers, his knifing, that's his roommates, right? Doesn't he kill his roommates with a knife, Gary?
Yes. But Chris, remember we had on your show with Ann and there too.
Right.
We talked to the survivor of one of the survivors of the Cuyahoga house, Kathy Rubin. And one of the things that she emphasized that was so important is that Bundy had been targeting a different woman at a dance that night, and it didn't work out. He was not able to lure her. He was rejected. Then he notices an open door to the sorority house, and in a frenzy goes in and just starts targeting randomly, not the kind of people that he would have. He was not targeting them because of the appearance and the prototype like you would have with someone he was trolling, but just sort of was so hungry to destroy women that he went on a frenzy. And in that same kind of frenzy state, he goes after Kim Leach, where she was not his choice, really. It was more like an opportunistic female, that as opposed to trolling for what he really figured into his psychology. And this is where I think a little bit about the work of one of the members of our foundation, Vernon Gayberth. Vernon Gayberth makes the point, if you attend his teachings and so forth, that you can have this mixed situation where you have a person who's motivated by this fantasy, but then there can be a single incident that also makes them just want revenge, where they'll just want to kill a bunch of people because now they're feeling slighted. And I think that's what you had, was that embedded within a guy with a fantasy world where he's playing out, killing over and over again this woman who has a certain appearance and so forth. Now he's just pissed that he got rejected. So like the whole female race, whole female gender, I want them dead. And I break into this sorority house and do this because the door is, ajar and I just was rejected. And I think that's kind of what happened there. With Kohberger, I think, again, there's what he wanted and then there's what happened. It's same way that I think everything went haywire with BTK, with the Oteros. I think with the Oteros, BTK was basically interested in the daughter.
Right.
And he winds up killing the whole family,
The 14-year-old. Right.
So I think that my sense is that it comes from, again, that kind of schizoid autistic quality of just being a bad judge of people and not anticipating what was really going to happen and being too grandiose. And he gets in there and everything just kind of goes haywire. Now, I have to tell you, a hypothesis I've had that I wish would be borne out because it has been in my mind for years is I think that there must have been some mechanism, probably on his phone, by which he was watching what was going on there. And I think that when he shut the phone off, put it in pilot, that airplane mode, whatever it is, he no longer knew what was happening in the house and did not know the developments, that Kaylee was in that bed and that Xana and Ethan were going to be there and the DoorDash and the whole thing. So he now thinks he's got his victim asleep in bed, available. And I think there was an intel failure because he had that phone off because he had planned to go in and get her. That's my theory of what happened. And as a consequence, he gets in there, a surprise, and he winds up committing this horrendous mass murder. The problem is that the prosecution, for whatever bizarre reason, felt the need to say there was no stalking. So everybody has forgotten about the idea that this guy was like a pro at surveillance to the point that he asked the police to let him work in surveillance for them, and probably was going to use that to experience some kind of sense of domination and to collect intel. The question is, how could he have done that? And Chris, do you not think that in some way he knew what was going on in that house? Whether it was watching through the windows or looking at TikTok videos or watching, what do you think he did?
No, I believe there's probably no question. I've said it from the day one. There was that cylinder down by the window that I thought was a bench.
Oh.
I'd go one step further. I think it was a party house. I bet he was in the house.
Yeah, he could. Yeah, I agree.
And you could surveil that way. Now, whether he was able to get up, well, I guess the party room, let's call it just a room where people just mill around. Is that like on a different floor as to where the bedrooms are?
Right.
Do we know?
Well, the bedrooms are there are bedrooms on the second, third, and first floor. They're on all three floors now.
But is there another room that they can mill around in?
Second floor.
Second floor.
Okay. Yeah, I believe it was there. We know that there was liquor or beer or something that they. So he could well have been there and nobody ever noticed it. Now, I do think I agree, Gary, that something had activated it in Bundy. And in this one with Kohberger, wasn't this about the time he was told he lost his TA?
Yes.
And the other thing about him is he wasn't like Bundy in terms of being a charmer, or he would have charmed his students, But no, he fights with the students. He gives them high grades or whatever the complaints were. So he gets the students angry at him and complaining about him. And that brings evidently the professor had to fire him or whatever. I don't have enough information there, but that would be hard.
But Ann, you saw, and I thought it was really interesting, you saw Catherine Ramsland, who had been his advisor, talk on Brian Enton's program. You've seen that footage. I know you've seen it, right? And what she says is that what she was so fascinated by is the fact that he was able to sort of be right under her nose and not show, in her opinion, red flags. Well, that's extremely interesting because that sounds a lot more like psychopathy then it sounds like a person who is autistic and can't, is socially
Right.
awkward.
No, I
So
agree.
that sounds like some kind of chameleon who can hide to the point that somebody can be educated on offenders and somehow not notice that you're harboring all these kinds of. So he must have just looked on paper like a guy curious about these things because he was studying them. And right under everybody's nose is harboring this kind of. But what's interesting about it is that by the time he gets out to Washington, it seems like the mask starts falling off and he can't hide his hostility. And he's just overtly angry at women. And, because I think he felt that the women complaining about him were going to take this position of power from him. And you've got a guy already walking around angry at not liking that to begin with. So I think it was a little bit of a last straw.
Well, they did. Was the professor that he was TA for teaching assistant for a female or male? Do we know?
I'm not aware of. You mean out at Washington? I'm unaware of that.
Washington, yeah.
And I love watching him when he gets pulled over by the female cop.
I know.
And he does that. It's like so classic. And but remember also that unlike Rodger, Kohberger had opportunities to be sexual. For example, there was an exchange student at school who was interested in him. He didn't want her, right? And remember the accusation? She starts thinking, he helped me when somebody broke in and took my prized possessions. He helped me set up a camera, and I started to. Dateline told us. Remember the Dateline episode?
Yeah.
But she started to think maybe he used her Wi-Fi password or whatever to watch her. When in fact, she was posed as a helper. No, she was a Korean exchange student.
Yeah. See, I think the blonde. Yeah, I think that the blonde is a very important thing. And college age. Yeah.
That he had a prototype in mind.
He did.
Well, and I think there's evidence, right? I mean, if we think
Bundy
about,
did too. Bundy did too.
Bundy had a prototype that he.
And that's where I think at the pool he's looking for that prototype. I think around other sorority houses he's looking for that prototype, and I think he finds that prototype in Maddie, maybe through the vegan restaurant or whatever the point of contact is, right? But and by the way, we call it a POC, right? It's the contact site where the suspect and the victim come across. And then from there you work your way out of it. But we have evidence on his phone that he was going down that lane of looking. What's really interesting here, if I hear what you're saying, I think this was a completely organized situation. I mean, he goes into this buying the knife, buying the clothing, checking the boxes, and he just goes down this whole list. And he enters into the crime scene, and it just goes not the way he expected it to go. With your theory, Dr. Brucato, of maybe he's gonna, cosplay out, taking her out of the house, going to the park, etc. Maybe that's a play in here. I find it fascinating, though, that when he does talk, because do either of you believe he will not speak?
At the you mean at the hearing? You mean
Not at the hearing, just
in general.
Now that he's in the container.
Not right now, I don't think so, but
I agree.
Later, yeah.
Yeah, I think at some point he's going to be writing the script of how this thing really went down.
But I also think that you should take everything he says with a grain of salt.
Totally agree.
I mean, it wasn't that a major confound in the serial killer study that they were being asked questions, but we don't know how much of it was true.
Well, it was matched. That's the beauty that we had all of their records. And if they said something that didn't match a record, no, it wasn't true. So you're right. But don't forget, he was asked that survey that he wanted to do was really more about how do you feel or what do you think? And it's almost like, is he just trying to compare himself with what other criminals? Because he said it was specifically for a criminal. You had to be a criminal to take it.
Unscripted segue, Dr. Burgess. to post-criminal behavior. Unscripted segue.
Yeah. Well, Chris, if he ever talks, and someone says to him, "What were you feeling during the murders?" Don't you think he's just going to parrot the stuff that he learned that other people felt?
Yeah, he
This
doesn't
guy
know
felt
how.
dead inside, so he'll just say, "I felt titillated, I felt angry, I felt whatever," because he's just going to spew what other people said. He's like a robot,
Sure.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So,
very robotic.
mimic. Yeah.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I think BTK is a little more animated.
BTK.
At his sentencing, right? When he lays it out, I call them projects and blah, blah, blah. Now he was very matter of fact, boom, boom, boom. And people went, holy crap, these people exist. Yeah. Job security, right, Dr. Burgess?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Job security. So,
okay. So I want to go to post-crime behavior, and we have
right.
33 questions stacked up in my bucket here. So I want to get through these last couple of slides here. Okay, post-crime behavior. Bryan Kohberger returned to the crime scene hours after the murders, called his father, and continued academic duties, suggesting compartmentalization or lack of immediate guilt.
Yeah. Also, he calls his father, not his mother, not his sisters.
Interesting.
Yeah, the father. That's important.
Very interesting. Why is that important?
Because it's the first person he calls after. I would love to know would you want to know what he says to Dad?
Oh yeah.
That's incredible. And that's a great question. I wish we had asked our serial killers, who was the first person you called?
That's such an interesting question.
$50 says you do the next time.
Because that's honest, right? And when you talk about what's true and what isn't, that's honest. That's behavior.
Great.
So you would want to talk to the father, wouldn't you?
Yes.
About that conversation.
And maybe that goes into the theory of why he wouldn't take why he took the deal.
Yep.
Did not want that question coming up from the prosecution.
Good point.
See, I think that when these kind of offenders compartmentalize, there is a secret wish for the two sides of the self to bridge. Like BTK keeping the photos in the house where his own family members could find them, and if they did, they'd go, "Oh, that's what you really are," right? Or the classic story of Gary Ridgway when he takes the second wife out to make love in the field, and there's a festering prostitute on the other side of the thicket, right? Because the idea is, I want the two parts of my world to come together. The mask falls off. I don't have to hide this anymore. And I think that calling the father in such close proximity to the offenses is extremely interesting psychodynamically, because I think the whole idea is you're seeing those two sides of the self get closer and closer together, culminating in them finding out the truth about him and probably saying to him, "I think you have to cop to this." Now the mask is off and the two sides have been brought together into one self. In a really weird way, Chris, that's a relief for this type. It's a relief that now they can yap and boast and talk about it and embrace it, that's what they are. And, because I think that's the whole thing, is walking around, feeling like you have to hide. You know what Bundy said about it? It's fascinating. If you read the interviews, the Michaud book, Bundy said that it feels a lot like the life of a gay person, having to live a double life, where you have a
duality of sorts.
Bundy made that statement that it was like the way in those days a gay individual might have felt, having to keep from their loved ones and so forth, that they had this whole other world going on. And that implies shame, which is very interesting in a psychopath. It means that they must at least know that other people wouldn't approve of what they do. I don't know if they feel guilty about it, but they certainly have enough of an imagination to know that they shouldn't go around telling people. Kohberger was weird enough that I think eventually, under enough stress, he would have slipped up and started to say things to people. I mean, simple example, he went on a date with one woman and he had an opportunity to be intimate, I'm sure, and he wound up instead saying he wanted to tickle her. I think some of his fantasy stuff started to spill over into the, and some of the misogynistic remarks and so on. I think the mask was falling off. You know what I'm saying? And so, I mean, Anne, isn't it interesting to think about that idea of sort of being relieved that you can
Oh,
finally show the other part of the self?
Oh, sure. I think they always feel relieved post-crime.
Yeah.
I mean, we have plenty of examples of that, or they go to sleep, or they go and have dinner, or they go, Jobert went to McDonald's for breakfast and he had to wash up first. Or they asked, did you wash up first? It must have been bloody. And he said, no, I wore gloves. And that's how we found out that he wore gloves. Yeah, he's so.
But Anne, a person that you could speak to that I think is a really good illustration is Henry Wallace.
Yeah.
With that whole idea of the double life, being
Absolutely.
in the military and being, wanting to be a good boy and all that.
Yeah. And they all talk about it, Gary, when you talk with them, plenty of other examples. So I think that Kohberger would, it'd be interesting to not to ask him, but just to say, tell me what your other side of your life was. I think that you know enough about him that, because if you just say, well, tell me, you ask a why question, you're not going to get a good answer.
Well, I was on a documentary where, I heard recordings of Henry Wallace. I know you know him. And interviewed him. And I remember him calling himself Bad Henry.
Bad Henry.
And Bad Henry. And I wonder, did he tell you the truth? Did he open up to you about what he did, or does he still?
Oh, I felt he did. Yeah, because he was facing a death penalty. Yeah, and I think that puts enough pressure on them.
Was
and
he
gave
also,
such
No, go ahead, please.
No, he gave really good examples, and it really made sense.
Do you think that he also, because I know his mother was abusive and the whole thing, he had rage towards women. I mean, that
was seductive.
Right, it was totally outrageous.
Not abusive, but seductive.
Well, I use the word abusive to mean that.
Oh, okay.
Or inappropriateness was abusive. I mean, psychologically, certainly. But my question is, do you think that he felt inadequate? Because I think sexual inadequacy is very critical to understanding all of these characters we're talking about.
Well, he felt inadequate when he murdered them. There was no DNA found. There was no. That was one of the curious things.
In other words, yeah.
Yeah, but he was married and had.
What's interesting is Maddie. There's information that there's blunt force trauma to her head from her parents. Her parents have released that information. And what's interesting for me, from, a crime scene process is the fact that does he attack her brutally first to incapacitate her?
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Like Bundy would have.
Good question.
Bundy-ness, right.
Good question.
That's the first time I'm hearing this info, Chris, but it supports the hypothesis I've had.
And it sounds like he used the butt of the K-bar to hit her.
Are you sure that was Maddie that they said that about?
Well,
I thought I had heard that.
Maybe it's Kaylee. Maybe I got that.
Big difference if that's true, and I don't know.
I think it's Kaylee.
Where did you hear that? Was that in the news?
No, I heard about it on the family situation.
And that's all important, Chris. I think that we haven't no official statement from autopsy or anything like that would be very, very fill in a lot of the blanks.
I agree. But if that was the case, then if Maddie's the primary target, then he's raging against Kaylee. And so
she's fighting.
Or is she in the way?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I don't know. I want to process that a little bit more. And I agree. We need to see the autopsy information to give a definitive concept. But let's go to Ted Bundy here. Often revisited crime scenes and kept trophies showing detachment and lack of remorse, maintaining confidence during trials, though. Elliot Rodger committed suicide after his attack, leaving behind a manifesto and videos indicating a desire for notoriety and control over his narrative. Analysis. This is my opinion. Kohberger's post-crime behavior, particularly returning to the scene and continuing normalcy, is more akin to Bundy's detachment than Rodger's dramatic suicide.
I think that's very good, Chris. You did a great, I would agree with everything you have. I see less similarity between Kohberger and Rodger.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Doc, because I got a couple more here.
Oh, okay. Keep going.
And
Sorry.
I just want to talk about execution and premeditation.
Okay.
Kohberger planned the murders over months with phone data showing 23 plus connections to cell towers near the crime scene. Some people are arguing, well, yeah, he was just driving in the area. Okay, we get that. However, there are 23 of them over a few month period, and they were all after sunset. And a purchase of K-bar knife months prior. The crime involved the nighttime home invasion of a student house using a knife to kill 4 victims, leaving a DNA-laden knife sheath, indicating boldness but potential carelessness. Ted Bundy, known for methodical planning. Bundy scouted victims in locations, often targeting college women in nighttime invasions such as the 78 Chi Omega sorority house attack, where he killed 2 women with a blunt object. He left evidence like bite marks showing overconfidence despite his knowledge. And now Elliot Rodgers. He planned his attack meticulously, leaving a 137-page manifesto, who you guys have studied extensively. Dr. Burgess, I know that for a fact, and will reveal that results of that study. I don't think the 118, the question of the 118 page 118, people are saying it's part of his manifesto, Elliot Rodgers' manifesto. And that's not going to be the case. Gary, you're shaking your head vigorously, and I would agree with you. Because I think we know where that piece of that evidence is.
But we speculate where it's
right.
The story does not suggest that it's going to have anything to do with that. No, that's an overblown. The association with Rodger is possible in the sense that I think Bundy, who we know he was admiring and studying, represented, I think, who he wished he was. If he was interested in Rodger, it would be more like, that's what I fear I am, but I don't necessarily feel proud of that. I identify with this type of person, but I would like to be, in my mind, that kind of person.
I've tried as hard as I can to be objective with all 3 of these personalities to say, who is Kohberger most likely relating to? And I'm not seeing, and we have 2 personality types, Bundy or Elliot Rodgers, right? Anyway, 137-page manifesto and YouTube videos declaring retribution. His spree involved stabbing his roommates, shooting near a sorority house, and vehicular assaults, ending in suicide, making it a public spectacle rather than a covert operation like Bundy. That said, my analysis. Kohberger's crime execution, particularly the targeted home invasion and knife use, mirrors Bundy's bold premeditated attacks more than Rodgers' chaotic multi-method spree aimed at public notoriety. That's just a simple, let's just cut through it and get there. So his academic interest also gives us evidence of that. Bryan Kohberger was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University. His master's essay analyzed his stage crime scene involving a stabbed woman, and he conducted online searches for Ted Bundy, including accumulating Bundy's appearance in selfies, i.e. wearing black hoodies. And of course, he watched the show on Bundy and then dressed up thereafter and took other photos. This suggests a deep intellectual fascination with criminal behavior, particularly serial killers. He was also interested in duality in personalities like Bundy. That was my thinking through what you were just talking about, Dr. Gary. He's trying to figure out, where does this mask go, i.e. the secret life, right, Dr.
Look at the paper on Bundy that he downloads right before he starts visiting the house multiple times. which is about Bundy and gets right into this stuff. I mean, I think that the other thing is, if you're fixated on Elliot Rodger, where are the photos of Elliot Rodger on his phone? I mean, Dateline showed us what he was looking at. Well, there was no Rodger there. See, that one of the things we said when we talked about him, and Dean and Greg and you and I, before this guy was even caught, we said that when there is not an overt sexual motivation, serial killers or mass murders or whatever that are of that where there's no overt sexual motivation, although there may be a subtext of it, they tend to assert domination and control in other ways, like manipulating the press, inserting themselves into the investigation, throwing red herrings, etc. We saw that in The Son of Sam, who, by the way, was on his phone. He was watching also about Son of Sam, which is interesting, because I saw the glimpse of him on the Dateline episode. Another example would be Ted Kaczynski, the Zodiac Killer. Those are people in that same, actually, they'd be on the same place in Michael's and my scale too, right? Those kind of people, they write to the press, they manipulate the press, they all that. And I think that part of that dominating and controlling behavior was this probably watching everything that was going on about him and inserting himself into it. We know the Dateline episode revealed that there were a lot of podcasts he was watching and shows he was watching about himself.
Sure.
I have no doubt that he saw what we were saying about him. Let's just say if any of us ever popped in there, he'd know exactly who we were. I think he would have been very annoyed by the things that we were saying about him, because I think we turned out to be really accurate. I think that would have really bugged him, that he was that transparent. I mean, this is a guy who thought he was like a mastermind. And, we didn't even have to know who he was. And everything we said was like, which implies you're not that special. Right.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that would have been very infuriating. But I have no doubt that, all that behavior of, not wanting to touch things without gloves, putting garbage in the neighbor's trash or whatever, you got to picture that while he's doing that, he's watching the press and getting clues that they're getting closer, and he's getting more and more anxious and more bizarre. And that's what I mean about the mask falling off. Now, right in front of his family, he's doing weird things. He can't even hide that. Imagine, I mean, what explanation was there to his family of why he's walking around with gloves? I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, wearing gloves, washing the car, bleaching it. I mean, you think they didn't start to suspect something? So I think that's what I mean about the mask starting to fall off. And I think probably there's a denial process for a little while, and then people go, "Oh my God, he really did this."
Well, and let's continue with the academic comparative, the comparative analysis here. Ted Bundy studied psychology at the University of Washington and later law at the University of Utah, U of U, reflecting an interest in human behavior and control systems. His academic pursuits were not directly tied to his crimes, but showed a similar intellect curiosity aligned with Kohberger's criminology focus. Elliot Rodgers, however, had no comparable academic interest in criminology or psychology. His background was marked by social isolation and mental health struggles. I think the evidence is clear that he struggled with mental, health for many, many years, with no evidence of studying criminal behavior, focusing instead only on personal grievances. And that's where his manifesto shines.
Which makes him look like a lot of spree and mass murders.
Absolutely.
Very, very classic behavior, pre-offense behavior in a certain narcissistically driven, malicious type of person. So if you are just emotionally driven, you might do it without that much cruelty. In other words, you might pause before you got in the car and went somewhere else and kept doing it. And then there's the type that doesn't just snap, they scheme and they want revenge, and where your personality is a little bit more aberrant, as opposed to just an emotionally unwell person. See, the difference is a big difference. And I think this guy had the mixture of being sort of nasty and angry in addition to being inadequate. So that, I mean, I always tell the story when I'm teaching about this. of someone that I spoke to who had, you know, and I won't give a lot of details here, but who had intended to jump in front of a subway car. And I said to the person, why was that how you were thinking of doing this, taking your life? Why that? And the person said, this is fascinating, said, I pictured all these people getting on the train with their school bags going to school and their satchels going to work and holding the hands of children because they had a life and a family, or holding someone that, you know, the hand of someone who loved them. And I thought, I don't have those things. But if I jump in front of the train, they won't get to those things. Not only will I be dead, but they won't get those things either. And so that there's a desire to level the playing field and kind of like sour grapes. That's how this guy was. He couldn't just kill himself. It was, I'm deprived, and so on my way out, you're all going to pay. And then you'll remember me. Then I'll be important. Then I'll be famous. I'll be, you know, maybe you'll be proud of me now, Dad, you know, that kind of thing, right? So he feels kind of invisible and has this pathetic desire for infamy because, you know, I guess it's better than being invisible and dying. So that's a nastier kind of character. Very different than a Bundy or a Kohberger that if they could have, would have gone around like a chameleon for a long time so they don't get captured and could keep doing this. Now that the mask is off, you know, Bundy certainly enjoyed the attention. Of course he did. He dangled it. He got favors. He got, you know, he had fans. He had women falling in love with him, you know, corresponding with him. He had people coming in to write books. He was trading for favors. And I have no doubt that Kohberger will enjoy it too. But I think if they could have, they would have hit it. This guy, there's no comparison. Don't you think, Ann, that that Kohberger will eventually start to eat it up?
I want to address this real fast. Page 118 is definitely, no, it's not.
Let's make a bet.
Yeah, I'll guarantee you it's not.
It is not going to be the Elliot Rodgers manifesto.
It's not going to be the Elliot Rodgers thing. And plus, Ann, you guys just did a whole bunch of research.
We have a published paper on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll make that available to anybody. Remember, Google means go ogle. Go ogle. That's what it means. Okay. So I appreciate you bringing that up, but that's the whole purpose of this presentation tonight. It's not to go Google it. Let's listen to professionals.
It's going to be about,
have written books.
Yeah.
Okay. And have studied. And if you have not bought Dr. Burgess's book, Killer by Design, hit the link when we're done. And also the New Evil, Dr. Brucato. Okay.
I love Killer by Design.
And I did not mean to interrupt. I know you were leaning forward to get right in there, Dr. Burgess. I apologize.
That's okay.
I hope I didn't throw your thought off. Did I?
No, I like your analysis. I like what Gary's been saying. I think that you two are spot on, as they say. So I don't disagree at all.
Well, okay. But Ann, the question is, do you think that he's going to eat it up? That he's going to start to enjoy it?
Oh, yes. Yes, I agree. Absolutely. And he's going to be famous. He's going to have books written. He's going to have documentary, maybe a movie. Who knows? Maybe a poem. I mean, everybody's. How many? How many letters is he getting? Fan mail. I'm sure has started.
And if he really did identify with Rodger, certainly wouldn't boast about that.
I don't see much in identification with Rodgers. I agree with Chris's analysis.
And no need to say anything, Jennifer. We love you. Thank you for being on in this channel. Trust me, I've done that more than 1,000 times. So you got 999 to catch up to me.
No, Jennifer is somebody who is
analysis. So
person, yeah.
The breakdown analysis, Kohberger's academic focus, and specifically interest in Bundy to line more closely with Bundy's profile, suggesting a shared intellectual curiosity in criminal behavior, while Rodger's profile lacks this particular dimension. And this is important to understand as more and more of this information is coming out about, well, he's an incel, etc. That's why I made this chart.
Very good.
And here's the aspect: academic interests, Kohberger, criminology fascination with Bundy. Ted Bundy, psychology and law. Elliot Rodgers, none. Focused on personal grievances. You guys can take a screenshot of this, pass it around the internet before it gets too crazy. Crime execution, nighttime home invasion, night use. Ted Bundy, nighttime invasions, knife blunt. Elliot Rodgers, public spree, stabbing, shootings. Premeditation. Kohberger, high. Cell tower pings, buys the knife. Ted Bundy, high. Scouting victims. Elliot Rodgers, high. Manifestos, some videos. Psychological traits. Kohberger, lack of empathy, potential psychopathy. Ted Bundy, psychopathy grandioso. And those of you who know me, I have a speech impediment every once in a while, and I screw up words like that. So I leave it to the professionals. Elliot Rodgers, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the audience doesn't, they have to understand that part of the reason that this is such a timely subject is that in, I think, what is it, 8 days or something, there's going to be the release of this book by James Patterson and Vicky Ward called the Idaho 4, which purports to be the definitive account of what. Now, let's bear in mind that this book was written when there was no idea this guy was going to take a plea, right? And so it was going to come out, and no one would know for sure if it was true. But supposedly there were 300 interviews, and they get all this information. And according to what's being written about this book online, there's going to be this kind of emphasis on this incel stuff and the Elliot Rodgers stuff. And what I think is important, what you're doing, Chris, I think is so valuable, is you're saying before everybody goes after that shiny object, remember that, Bundy is who was all over his phone and who was studying and so forth. So don't think there's no Bundy element. So I think, Chris, what you're getting at, unless I'm very much mistaken, is that he may have been caught up in that stuff, but you can't ignore that he aspired to be a Bundy. Right?
Yeah.
So, isn't that really ultimately what you're getting at? That
I think when he opens his mouth,
right,
and says, Elliot, who? Why? Oh, yeah. So what? That guy was nowhere near me. That's what's going to happen. That's my prediction, that he's going to step out and say, no, Elliot Rodger would have wanted to be me. I wasn't inspired by him. He would have been inspired by me. And I think he would also say, I would submit, if I was in the interview room with him, I would lean across the table and say, so Bryan, help me understand how we got here. And I would just hang that question.
Yeah. And
he's going to, Dr. Burgess, more than anybody, and Dr. Brucato, what's he going to do with that question, right?
Yeah.
Why don't they just use his own questions from Reddit as a blueprint of what to ask him?
He's going to run, right? And if any of us in a professional setting like that, even in the jail, were to say, hey, so I hear you're like Elliot Rodger, he's going to go, yeah, and monkey's flat on my butt. Okay. That commercial is over. That 30-second commercial is over. And that's where, if we look at the psychological traits, grandiosity, Elliot Rodgers, narcissistic victimhood complex. And Dr. Burgess, your research in his manifesto is powerful now, because I think people are going to go to that when this book comes out. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Don't misunderstand me.
It just pieces the story.
It completes the story. I don't want those individuals also to be embarrassed, hypothetically. I want this whole story of Bryan Kohberger actually coming out and saying, this is who that person behind that wall.
Sure.
is.
Yeah.
And so the social behavior, they don't line up. Awkward, intense, Bryan Kohberger. Ted Bundy, charismatic, manipulative. Elliot Rodgers, isolated, rejected. Okay.
Yeah.
One is awkward, one is isolated. But to Bryan Kohberger's plus column, he's out there trying to find people with birthing hips. Okay. Elliot Rodgers isn't.
And also loving The Handmaid's Tale.
And loving he sits in the front row with the Handmaid's Tales. Yeah, there's a picture.
Just something about what he felt women were for.
Right, exactly.
Subjugation, getting back at the time machine and putting us back in the days when a woman was, not able to work or do anything but make babies, right? And I told you that's what the incels talk about that I've interviewed.
And this is fascinating when I started doing the math on this one. The motive unclear with Bryan Kohberger currently. Unclear, possibly power driven with an underlining sexual, tone to it. There has to be evidence of the fact that he has all of that inappropriate material on his phones and probably on his devices. We don't know the totality of it yet, but I can guarantee go ahead, Doc. I can guarantee you there's going to be a ton. And that's probably, in my opinion, why he had his defense team take that TV out of his apartment. What's on that hard drive that we never got? In Ted Bundy, power control, Elliot Rodgers, misogyny, and revenge. That was his motivation.
Yeah, it was more emotional. Elliot Rodgers had, like a typical spree of mass murderer, there's a more acute emotional component. He just was nasty and played it out on a nasty, but the other guys are a lot more reptilian and cold. You see the difference is that there isn't the impulse quality. I mean, Kohberger seems to have been planning that even before there was a victim. He's buying a knife. And
so when I measured the post-crime behavior, Bryan returns to the scene, continues a normal life, at least in his perception, to the point where he gets pulled over and he says, yeah, we're going for Thai food. Okay. I mean, who said Ted Bundy would say that? Ted would be like, yeah, we're going to Thai food. The dad thought it was so weird. He corrects him. And you see Bryan look at him like, no, we're going for Thai food, dude. We're going down this lane. Okay. Ted Bundy revisited scenes and he kept trophies. Right. We have information potentially that Bryan left the house with something. The DA said it was a container, but we don't know for sure exactly what it was. I did a show where there's a device hanging off of Kaylee's room, and Maddie's room. There was like this black thing hanging in there. I wanted to know if that thing disappeared. Elliot Rodgers, well, he committed suicide and he left a manifesto. Totally not the same type of behavior. So the final analysis, from my opinion, and I want to hear the two professionals, doctors, here was my final analysis. Kohberger's behavioral signs align more closely with Ted Bundy than Elliot Rodgers. The similarities in crime execution, nighttime home invasion, knife use, the porno, college victims, academic interest in criminology, and specific fixation on Bundy, i.e. the searches, emulating his appearances, suggest a strong connection. Both exhibit psychopathic traits like detachment and left evidence despite their knowledge, indicating overconfidence. Kohberger's social awkwardness contrasts with Bundy's charisma, but aligns more with Bundy's covert, power-driven approach than Rodgers' public, ideologically charged spree. Rodgers' explicit misogyny, manifesto, and mass shooting style diverge from Kohberger's quieter, targeted attack and lack of overt ideology. While Kohberger shares Rodgers' social struggles, i.e. an incel, his crime execution and psychological indicators, particularly his Bundy fascination, points more towards Ted Bundy. Thoughts?
Well, I agree with that. I certainly don't have any. I think you've got it. I don't see him having very little identification with Rodgers, but certainly do with Bundy. Gary, you
I
have
think
thoughts?
it'll satisfy the public's desire for answers for a little while until experts point out that it doesn't make a lot of sense as the only explanation. I think there may be a Rodgers element to it because he studied a lot of offenders, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, who was on his phone? I mean, at the end of the day, who's he cosplaying as? At the end of the day, I mean, who was interested in the kind of violent plea that was of the same exact type that he's looking at? I mean,
Right.
I think that's what we've got to look at. And from that perspective, I think the way I would frame it is there's a very big difference between what he was and what he wanted to be. And I think Bundy represented what he wanted to be, having complete control over, being able to get what he wanted in this kind of way. But the reality is that he was a lot more like those kind of offenders that are just too socially awkward to achieve that. And I think would have ultimately been somebody that, let's say, for example, he didn't attack in the dark and actually tried to assault somebody when they were awake or in the light. I'm not sure how adequate he would feel. That's why I actually think he's a lot more like somebody like Robert Hansen. Remember Robert Hansen that in Alaska, the very socially awkward kind of weird guy with a speech impediment who, ultimately could only kill women who were running around where they were turned around, like they didn't see him. It was late. It was dark. He's shooting them from the back because I think if they turned around and saw him, they'd be like, "I'm afraid of you. You're sort of pathetic." Well, I feel that was a big part of why Kohberger cloaked himself in darkness like that and wanted people who were asleep or drugged or whatever, because it's a compensation for being completely pathetic. Bundy, like a true psychopath, was totally fearless. Bundy had that quality that there was nothing that scared that guy. And that's a characteristic of psychopaths, is that fearlessness. That ability to just, like even just the idea, for example, I always think about Bundy having a victim who's screaming, right? You have to picture, like, she wakes up in the VW bug and she's screaming on the top of her lungs, right? Because anybody would. And literally just pulls over on the side of the road in some forested area in the dead of night. Maybe no moonlight. There could be wolves and animals rolling around. And is perfectly fine bringing the woman into the forest and feeling in control. I would never go into a forest on the side of the road in the middle of the night. I'd be bothered that I had no control. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, don't you imagine how fearless he must have been to do that? Kohberger was more used that as a way to cloak his pathos, I think, and hide himself from the victims. And I'm glad that he got nothing that he wanted. He got nothing out of it. And it was a terrible, terrible waste of human life. And now he's going to spend the rest of his life, in a jail cell. I will say, though, that I think part of the reason he took the plea was it was a last pathetic gasp of control. I think that ultimately it was a way of saying, this is only happening because I'm choosing it. Because I think ultimately he thinks like a scientist. What is the independent variable to manipulate to get what I want? That kind of thing. And he failed. He's a failure. And so now what do I expect? I expect the rest of his time in jail to be fabricating narratives, partially to lie and get what he wants, and partially out of a kind of cognitive dissonance, so he could remember it, that he had some glorious victory and he was some big shot. But in reality, he's just a kind of a pathetic loser. And that's why I so resent the people that admire him. I mean, I'm sorry, but as far as I'm concerned, all that matters in the story of the victims. And he is just not worth being interested in. I mean, Anne, don't you agree that the public's fascination with him is odd?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm just reading some of the comments coming through. So I'm not.
I love this one. That's a great comment.
Yeah, let's answer some of them.
Yeah, we've got 39 of them locked up here behind.
Okay.
We're stacked up like aircraft coming into JFK.
Yeah,
so
I agree with Eagle, Stars, and Stripes.
Well, let me let Ann answer some questions because I've had too much airtime.
Yes, I'll read it. It's more of a statement. And thank you, Eagle Stars and Stripe. Happy 4th. Have to be honest and say that telling a woman she has good birthing hips on a first date won't help the involuntary celibacy. What a great point. Here is a compliment. One of the best panels. Thank you. I concur with you. These two individuals are two of the greatest minds in forensic psychology in the world. Actually, if you've never ever met Dr. Burgess, she's a living legend, literally a living legend. And these books behind me, a lot of these books here, I have the manual from 1990 when I went to the behavior analysis course. You're all over that, Dr. Burgess. And for that, I thank you for influencing my career. I am grateful to always have you on the show. Let's see here. I think Ethan, here's a statement. I think Ethan was basically 187 out of jealousy, that's the California Penal Code, for being in the house with beautiful girls. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
You think he, go ahead. What do you think?
Please, Ann.
Yeah, I go back to what I said before. I think he was in the house. I think he might have been at some of the parties, and maybe somebody could have identified him. Although I think he wore a mask. Could we ever clarify that? Do we know, Chris? He wear a mask and gloves, which I suspect during the killings. Yeah.
Yeah. He was he just his eyebrows.
Yeah. Well, nobody could have identified him, so he didn't have to kill because he could be identified. So he had to kill for other reasons.
Yes. And thank you, everybody, for your kindness here. KB seemed proud with his yeses when he was answering, when the judge asked him, yes. I mean, he was pretty, I thought he had an inflection in his voice when he answered about Ethan. I said that last night, but
I got to tell you, and I think I've said this on Josh's show too. It reminds me of how it's like if you're having an argument with a person and they're mean to you, it hurts. But if they have no reaction at all, it hurts even more. The complete indifference is the most hurtful thing of all. There's no feeling in it at all. And what I felt about him was that he was completely indifferent and dead in the soul, like he was talking about having killed a fly. And so to me, the thing that's so disturbing about it is that it suggests a moral compass that is completely broken. It was like he might as well have been talking about having taken apart a carburetor or something. Did you kill? Yes. Done. That was the end of it. There was no emotion. He didn't even glance over at the families. Nothing. I mean, listen, have you ever been in a courtroom with a confessing killer? I mean, sometimes even to be sadistic, they look at the family. This guy was staring into, as if he was talking about an object. And I think that's what made it more bone-chilling to me, was the complete absence of feeling. And did you feel emotion from him?
No.
Cold. Yeah, I don't think so either. Why do you think he took a plea deal instead of firing?
I can answer that. Idaho has a firing squad, and I think that he would be scared of facing 5 guns.
Someone else having that much power.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating and refreshing to learn from you experts. I believe it helps the general public better understand and process these cases. Thank you so much, Katie, for saying that about these esteemed guests here, because they are. I mean, they're the real deal. When law enforcement has a problem, or they go to these two. They're part of many other people, but they're part of the group that law enforcement goes to and goes before they catch a Bryan Kohberger and goes, "Hey, I need to ask you a question, Dr. Burgess, Dr. Brucato. Here's what I got." Boom, boom. And I would do a proud PowerPoint like that, lay it all out, and then I would sit back and listen. If you want to really see how their minds work, Go back to the early, before Bryan Kohberger was ever captured or known about, where these two minds here and others that were on that panel that night said, okay, we get it. Here's what we're probably looking at. And guess what? They were right. Okay. I hate, spoiler alert to YouTube. Okay. They were right. Okay. Spoiler alert.
We do this a few weekends, Chris.
So yeah, exactly. So thank you, Katie, for saying that, because I know it means a lot to them. And because a lot of this noise in today's society, in social media, etc., you could be making ham and cheese sandwiches, open a YouTube channel, and by golly, you're a crime expert. Okay, today, that's what's happening, and which is okay. That's a good thing, right? For people to do their own thing, that's okay. But then you also have to go into the emergency room when you cut your finger off. Okay, there's not a YouTuber in there saying, "Here, let me paste it on and put it together for you." Okay, and that's where these two come in, and others.
Okay. Chris, there was a look. I mean, you wouldn't believe the things people say. There was a, shall we say, dimwit who in the public told the story that the only reason that I am recognized as knowing anything at all is because I was a student of Anne's in her class, and she favored me by telling the public that they should listen to me. I never took a class with Ann Burgess in my entire life. I learned from her endlessly, but I was never, it was a completely made up fact. See, the point is that people just cook this stuff up. I've learned the art of not listening to it.
Yeah, we don't listen.
You just don't listen to it. I've got a day job. I've got to go out there and actually do this work. And
right.
I have learned from you every day, but I was never your student.
No.
Right. You see what I'm saying? It's just made up. People just make this stuff up. It's amazing to me. And I've heard worse than that. And Chris, the stories people have told about you, holy cow. It's like the National Enquirer level nonsense,
Well, that's why I have a wall of shame behind me.
Yeah. Oh, but at this point, I mean, at some point, you just kind of go like, the imagination is an extraordinary thing, So you just take pride in your own work, and you just ignore all that crap because it doesn't do anything anyway, except make buzz, and 2 days later, nobody even listens to it.
Okay, so Echo Lamb has a question. Could BK have thought he was as charming like Bundy?
Think he was charming? You're asking?
That's the question.
I don't think he thought he was charming. Do you, Gary or Chris? Gary?
No, I think the whole point is that he tried to make a science out of how to get what he wanted, and nothing he did worked. So he finally resorted to murder.
And Buford has a question that then kind of dovetails. Do you think he would also want to have the serial label, i.e. to now be labeled as a serial killer?
Who? Kohberger?
Kohberger, yeah.
He's not a serial killer.
I know, but the question Buford's asking, do you think he wants that label?
If he had committed a serial killing, I think at some point, yeah, he would have liked chatting about it. And I think he imagines himself being studied in classes just like he was taking, where they're going to say, they're going to, I really think that while he was sitting there, he thought about that. I could have done that better than the people who were interesting to my professors, that kind of thing.
I want your guys' take on how do you think he's going to react at the sentencing?
Well, part of the way he'll react is what his lawyer tells him, don't do this or do that or whatever. There'll be some of that.
Definitely.
Sentencing protocol, rules and regulations, right? But I'd love to know what he was thinking, that whether he'll try to control himself. I don't see him acting out in any way.
Yeah, we talked about this, Elizabeth.
Yeah. I think that if they had a trial and there were people getting up and testifying, particularly women, who were saying things that felt to him like the narrative was wrong or that were getting under his skin, I could see him having an anxious desire to kind of say something, pipe up to correct it. Because I think because they anticipated some of that weirdness, they went out of their way to talk about the autism thing, because I think they were trying to give everyone a heads up that he might be like a control freak and say things that were inappropriate. But I don't think that was coming from, well, we don't know, but I don't think it was coming from an autistic place. I think it would bother him that you were messing with the accuracy of the narrative. And I think that's how we're going to get info from him eventually, is going to be somebody who goes in and says, correct us. Like if I were to go in and talk to him, I'd say, did you see the profile we did on? And I'm sure he would say yes. And I'd say, where were we wrong? Tell us what we did wrong, instead of saying, let me help you understand how we were right. And I also think, I'd love your thoughts on this end, but I think they've got to talk to this guy. They got to let this guy talk in the third person about what bad Bryan did, because he has that fragmentation. That's what they did with Bundy. Bundy talked, he would discuss himself in the third person. And it helps with some of these guys. What do you think? Or do you think he should own it and boast, talk in a boastful way to get him to talk, that is to say?
Well, he's had 2.5 years to think about it. So it's not like he just did it. So, and I think that it's going to take a while. What everybody says is it takes a while after they are sentenced for them they go through a real down period, because they have to at some point come to grips with it. This is my life. And then I think there may be a resurfacing to, might they talk to someone. A lot will depend, and I will never know this, whether the family gets involved to talk with them, who wants to get to them, if you will, and who will be able to get to them. Obviously, family, but I don't know who else. And his of course, his attorneys.
So Jennifer has a comment here. I'm still hung up on the book with underlining page 118. Please share what book you think it is, Dr. Gary.
No, I will not. I will only say that I believe that it is a book about Bundy. There is a very specific book I think it is, and having reviewed page 118, it would be extremely revealing if I'm right, but I'm going to hold that back for a few reasons. But I won't discuss that, but I do not believe it has anything to do with Elliot Rodgers. Incidentally, where is Elliot Rodgers' manifesto published in a book with page numbers? Does anyone know?
That's a great question.
I mean, it's a book. Is there a printed copy of that somewhere? You could go to Barnes & Noble and buy. I mean, what are they talking about? This is a book, a criminology book that someone went to the store and bought, and it was in their possession with an underline. I mean, doesn't even make sense that it's the Elliot Rodgers Manifesto. That is not published in a book you go to Barnes & Noble and buy. Silly. So, but because it was very clear, it's a criminology book with notation. So, and you can use your imagination. If it's about Bundy, there's only a few books it could be. That's what I did. Go and look at the Bundy books that are easy to get, and look at page 118, and you'll see clearly that one of them on page 118 sounds like Bryan talking about himself. And you'll see why I think it's that book.
Well, and he was also fascinating with it, even some of his thesis and some of his work, his college work about that duality aspect of his personality. So I think that's. A lot of people
thought it was my book. A lot of people thought it was The New Evil. Yeah. I had that question for over 2 years. People, even reporters, asking me.
I haven't even looked at your book, Ann, to page 118. I should flip over.
Well, what's fascinating?
Speaking of books, Killer by Design.
I love that book.
By Dr. Ann Burgess, and go figure, The New Evil. Go purchase these books.
Nina keeps asking this question. Can somebody answer it? I don't know who she means by AT.
Ann Taylor, the attorney.
Oh, the attorney. Could she have told? Oh,
yeah.
I see.
Basically, she's
I have no
win or
idea.
lose. I'm
Have
out.
any idea?
So she basically is feeling Danny's thinking,
Was she going to?
and keep us on the right track here, Danny.
That's a good
Nina.
question.
Could Ann Taylor have told BK, win or lose, she was out? So basically, I'm done. You need to take this plea deal. I think that would probably,
It's a good question, but I don't know the answer.
it probably would have been unethical, unfortunately, for her to have positioned herself like that.
Yeah.
What a treat. I totally agree with you, Spacey Dub.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. How to get Dr. Burgess's signed books online? How do we
I
do
don't
that?
know.
I love this because people think they're like, we're going to give our home address or something. Send it.
Well, you know, that's a great idea. Maybe one of these days we can do a giveaway or something and figure out how to get it.
There is an answer to that, though. I think at CrimeCon, people can get Dr.
Yeah,
Burgess.
come to Crime Talk. That's where you get signed.
Aren't you there? You're there, Ann, right? At the next CrimeCon?
Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there because the expert witness comes out.
Stay strong, Dr. G. Here's a good one. Danny Rolling, I think Bryan took a lot. Oh, this is a very interesting observation.
I wondered that also.
Interesting. Unaliving. He's a copycat unaliver, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Aren't they all? I mean,
Well,
they've got to learn from other people. Go ahead, Ann, please.
Chris, one of your questions had come through about whether he was watching. I said that there was one of the your viewers thought that what is it, Papa or Daddy?
Papa Rodgers.
Papa Rodgers, yeah, was
disturbing.
But they thought that Kohberger, I think he had watched if he could. He can't. And somebody had asked, "Is he watching now?" I don't think they can watch in jail, can they, Chris?
They can. They can.
Oh,
they can.
Okay.
It all depends. Right now he doesn't have access to full connectivity because he's in the county jail. But when they get to prison, they have an honor system.
Oh, okay.
And that's why, right? Trustees. That's why trustees are allowed to walk around to the staff offices, blah, blah, blah. So if he works, because he's going to be a lifer and he's going to be in protective custody for quite some time, kind of getting, his sea legs on him, they may just hand him a tablet with email access right away. So he'll be able to send emails right away.
Okay.
So yeah, let's see what happens with that, right?
Does Idaho have a state prison or will they send them out of state? You have no idea.
Well, if it gets too crazy, they have a MOU with a private prison in Arizona called Seguro.
Okay.
And that prison takes over if his life becomes too dangerous, i.e. other inmates threaten him, they can move him to that segregation max 5. And that's just outside of Phoenix.
But he can email people?
Oh, yeah. He sure can.
So you get one phone call kind of a thing, but you can email all you want?
And you can put money on his book for phone calls and commissary. Yeah. So, you can buy him, some ramen or whatever you feel, he'd be needing.
Disturbing.
So, yeah.
Very good. Okay.
So I'm going to run through some of these here real fast to see if there's questions. And then, guys and gals, I'm going to let Dr. Burgess run because I can tell she's got family commitments.
I got class tomorrow.
And tell everybody what you're doing. Can you? Is that okay?
Yeah, I do my summer program at Boston College for high school students in forensics. So they'll be watching. Yeah. So tomorrow we'll be studying rape. That's on the docket.
That's awesome. And she runs a mini. Runs a mini body farm.
Yeah, mini body farm. Yeah,
mini body farm.
Well, they have to do an experiment with chicken legs and see how the bugs do, because that's the first line of attack. And when you have a dead body, is the flies and the bugs come. So we're going to see how long it takes, and we have races to see who wins.
Yeah,
bugs come the fastest.
I remember I had a new patrol guy, and we had a natural on the couch, and he comes over to me, and I've got the Vicks on my mustache, those of you who don't know, when you work homicide, mustaches are mandatory equipment because you take Vicks vapor rub and you put it in your mustache so you're inhaling and you're not
Yeah.
smelling what's going on in the room.
Smart, very smart.
Fast forward, long story short, he comes up to me, he goes, you see that guy, you sure that guy's dead? And I'm like, yeah, he's gone, man. I mean, he goes, but his stomach's moving. I said, yeah, wait. And when the ME got there and the body snatchers, I told them, be careful. Don't grab him at both the head and the feet at the ankles simultaneously, because there's going to be a real problem. Anyway, long story short, it was a real problem. Everybody left. And I was thinking, man, I don't miss that. I don't miss that.
You don't miss that.
I don't miss it. Dr. Burgess, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to keep Garrett a little bit longer. And we sure love you and appreciate you. Go buy her book, Killer by Design. It's an amazing read, and you can get it anywhere, right?
Wait, and can you pre-order the new book yet?
I think you can, yes.
Because remember, to be a bestseller, you only need a certain number of copies by the first day, and that includes all the pre-sales.
Oh, okay.
All the pre-sales. So go ahead and buy it in advance and help make it into a bestseller.
There she goes, everybody. Dr. Ann Burgess, a living legend. We'll see you on the next one.
Okay.
And we'll talk. I'll see you in the research meetings.
Very good. Okay. Thank you all. Good to see you.
Good to be seen. Bye. Okay. So I've got a couple more I've got to run through here.
Isn't she great?
We got a bunch of things up in here. Isn't she great? Isn't she amazing?
Not my teacher in a classroom, but my teacher every day as a colleague, and
I'll tell you,
a beautiful human being. I really
and everybody in the chat, you guys are so amazing, so kind. I mean, Dr. Burgess is literally a living legend.
Yeah.
And to have her on is always a treat, and to have an opportunity to be a part of the foundation with her is just absolutely amazing. If you're going to CrimeCon, make sure you see her there and pick up her book. Okay, would you? She'll sign it, I'm sure, at the table.
I get to work with Ann every day of my life, Chris, in being the Boston College, where I'm a visiting scholar, in our research on books we work on articles we work on, in Super Sleuths group, in the Cold Case Foundation. And, I always joke that knowing Ann is sort of like where you forget to pause and think how miraculous the sunrise is. It happens every day. So you just stop remembering how amazing it is. And that's how it is to know Ann.
I remember early in my career reading stuff that she had written and had prepared and trained. I mean, she's trained thousands of people, law enforcement, not only in forensic nursing and, that kind of stuff, but just the psychology of how things go. And thank you, Rhonda. You're so kind for saying that. I know everybody appreciates that. Thank you, Spencer. Okay, I'm trying to get back up here from some earlier things. Thank you, Miss Sharon. Dutch Baby. Kohberger reminds me of one who studies military strategy, probably a forward operator. I don't know.
It's an interesting point.
Great point, though. Great point. Yeah, he was kind of a wannabe cop, so that would not surprise me. Happy Chickadee. Absolutely love that name. That is one of the best names going. Does BK think he's better than Bundy? As BK will not face the death penalty. Regarding thumbs up photo, his possible injured hands, then the dilated pupils in bright light, meaning he's excited.
It's interesting, Chris. You and I have talked about this, and I said it on your show, but it sort of got missed in the press and everything. But I think it's fascinating. Is that on the day that Kohberger had the death penalty taken off the table for this sorority house kind of murder, series of murders. It was the 39th anniversary of Bundy having his execution vacated for the Chi Omega murders.
And I didn't even put that in the correlation tonight.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I don't know how I remembered that, and I went and looked it up. But I remember it was the 2nd of July, right? Wasn't that the date? July 2nd?
Correct.
Yeah. So, just it's interesting to me. And I think there definitely was a kind of Bundy wannabe quality. But I don't know. I mean, I think there was a little bit of kind of wanting to pick up from the master, kind of a thing, a little with that. And but sometimes we can overblow these things like they're very black and white, and there was nothing else that he was sort of adding to the story on his own. I don't know. I mean, I just think it's important not to get caught up in narratives that are just a little too on the nose. I'm sure not every single thing he did was related to Bundy, but I think he studied him. He was interested in him. All of these guys study somebody, emulate somebody. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, right? They've got to learn, from somebody. And that was somebody he was interested in and identified with, sure. But I don't know if the idea was like, let me go out and kind of like check off the list that I'm beating him. One thing I worry about in imitation of Bundy is he may try to escape. And but we've got to kind of that was sweet. Somebody in the audience said to remember, they're like, Dr. Brugato's a lit. I don't think of myself that way, but I think that's very sweet. Thank you.
Very nice. And Catherine, thank you. You're 100% right, and that's why I think it, like Dr. Burgess was saying, there's going to be a cooling off period, and see how he adapts and improvises at the conclusion of that. Did he want to spare his parents from testifying? That's been one of the theories that's been floating out there. I don't have specific information about that. It's been floating around, kind of like you guys have probably all heard that, but it's certainly a possibility.
I think it's more likely that they said to him, we can't get up there and lie. We're not going to get up there and testify and say we thought you were, that we didn't suspect you or something like that. It's really hard to imagine this guy having hallmark feelings about his parents. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I think it's just a deadness there, It's the engine's running, but there's no one behind the wheel.
Yeah, the POI, the contact point for victim found on Christmas. That's an interesting thought, for sure. Let me get up here. Maybe BK and Happy Chickadee. I don't know why I love that one. Maybe BK picked houses as he thought it was epitome of everything he couldn't be. I also believe Maddie was target. Looking forward to the gag order being lifted.
Well, what I think that point is picking up on that's important is that something that I think Kohberger probably shared with Bundy is that underneath whatever perverse psychosexual thing was going on there, or probably going on there with Kohberger, we'll wait to see. But based on what he was watching and so forth, according to Dateline, I'm pretty confident about it. One thing that I think they had in common is there was also an element of envy. The haves and the have-nots, and the haves don't want me, right? Remember, for example, he had a girlfriend that was beautiful and prominent, and so she rejected him, and that was a huge trigger for him. I think that with Kohberger was also an envy element. And so here you have this home of people who love each other and care about each other, whatever. He didn't know anything about that kind of world. And envy is is an ugly thing, a very diabolical thing, actually. And I think that there was an element of that. Yes, I always think that about home invaders, that they're a little envious of the goodness and the love and the affection and the happiness in the home, because they don't have a sense of belonging. So they want to ruin it for other people. So
what do you think about this question? Laura SoCal 714. Boom, Orange County. I wonder if KB had an issue or style in the bedroom that can shed some light. Did he ever have a girlfriend? I don't know if there's evidence.
I think it was definitely inadequate. Inadequate in some way. We don't know what it is, but that I think there was a sense of himself as inadequate based on the clues we see. I'm not sure that he let's just say I wouldn't be surprised if he wouldn't, even if he were given an opportunity to be intimate, I think he would be pretty clueless about things.
Could Chickadee, again, very kind. Could BK have be tormented by his eyebrows due to them being prominent evidence? They have changed a few times. Now they look like they've been shaved off. Yeah, they certainly did look like they would have been changed. And it could have been prominent members. That's all she had going for, was to identify him through those eyebrows.
You know what I'm surprised nobody asked about, Chris? That the categories in the new evil for all three of these offenders.
Well, we know that BK is 16.
Right. And Bundy would be a 17 unless we feel that some of the ligature strangulation constituted torture. Then he would be an 18. And Elliot Rodger is top score, ranking that he could get in the scale. I hate the idea of thinking of it like a score, but his designation would be, the maximum would be 15, where the spree killers go. But I think he's closer to 13, the more inadequate, insecure, kind of disturbed kind of person who goes on a spree. And there's a big difference between a 13, a 15, a 16, a 17, and an 18. And of course, that would imply that the one with the most horrendous motives out of all of them is Bundy. But then it would place BTK not
all the categorize. Tell everybody about the system here that's in the book.
Well, okay. Well, the new evil is the follow-up to the book Anatomy of Evil, which Michael Stone was a mentor of mine, wrote alone. And he developed a scale really inspired by a desire to explain in courtrooms how you can almost predict that an offender is going to keep offending if their offenses were rooted in personality and fantasy. Because if there were a more situational reason for doing it, chances are you would experience remorse, or you would get some kind of help and you wouldn't do it again. And then there was a show, Most Evil, where this was presented. So and then what happened is I teamed up with him to do the follow-up book, and I expanded it with him so that it didn't just have 22 categories looking basically at homicide, but included all kinds, every manner of offense, and really laid them out, not so much as a scale of degree of evil, as much as just a series of profiles that really are worthy, I think, of research and seeing if they work. So the idea was all this sort of clustering of traits and seeing what we could. And it is interesting to think how part of the way I was able to envision Kohberger was comparing him to all the other people who do similar things, and then guess a lot of things about him from all the other people who would fall in the same bucket. And then, of course, from the mass murder database at Columbia that I did with Dr. Burgess, right? Burgess. So, but I think that the point of the system is, in my opinion, is about categorization that captures the overlap of situational factors, personality factors, and personality factors that kind of move up a ladder from narcissism through various degrees of psychopathy all the way up to sadism. And it also takes into consideration what I have called in the literature elimination murder, the idea that some people are in the middle. It's not about a situational thing. It's not about fantasy. It's nothing personal. They just have something they want to achieve, and you're in the way. And so what we did was we sort of laid out all these different types of offenses using case vignettes and where they would go. And then in the second half of the book, which is a whole different tone to it, is about this construct we proposed called new evil, which is the idea that the convergence of new technologies and changes in the personality and the disinhibition level of the average person and collapse of certain social mores are coming together to create a perfect storm where in the period since the 1960s, you're seeing crimes that simply never happened before or virtually never happened, or they couldn't have happened because the technology didn't exist, or people just weren't audacious enough to do them. And so it gets into this sort of cultural stuff. And the book is taught in a lot of schools, and
law enforcement.
I'm proud to say it has done really, really well. BTK, what it's interesting. He's called bind, torture, kill, but there was really no torture, unless you consider the use of ligature for slow strangulation a form of torture. But when we talk about torture, we're talking about like having a torture chamber where you're applying medieval style torture, sadistically, in a person. But but if there's that sort of non-protracted torture-like element, you have 18 is the coding for that. So it depends on if you feel there was some degree of torture. But I think that BTK is a 17, which is a serial killer who is essentially playing out a psychosexual fantasy, does not engage in protracted torture. So that's where I would place him. But you could make a good argument that BTK is an 18, like Bundy probably is. Anyone else?
Yeah. I'm just sitting here. You got to get Gary's book, and it will make a lot more sense because he breaks them down so succinctly. And that's why on my thumbnail tonight it says 16. That
16.
Bryan's a 16. And let's see here. After Bundy escaped to Florida, he had no plan. He was totally lost. His attack at Sorority House shows he had devolved, in my opinion. Poor child. Kimberly magnifies it. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the one case he, on top of a few others, but that was really the one where he didn't want to go into that, did he, Gary? Ted?
No, I know what happened to her, but we know what happened to her, but it's very hard to get that info. I mean, it's not widely, it is published, but not widely. And, I think what happens is, even among serial killers, there's kind of like a hierarchy of needs thing where if they had their druthers, they would have a very particular victim that they would go out and find. They would troll it like a casting agent, like it has to be you. But what happens is if they get hungry enough, they will get looser in the criteria, more disorganized, more, and Kimberly Leach, I mean, let's face it, he didn't know how old she was. He knew that she was a student in the school where he pulled over. But I think basically she was an opportunistic victim, a female in the street, that he pulled over. And it's not like he said, oh, I want to now go for a child. It was more like he was sort of hungry for a victim, and there was a female that was just sort of there out in the street. He told her a ridiculous story, and that was the end of it. And with the sorority house, it was because he had been rejected by the victim that he had his eye on, and then just got kind of frenzied. Also, I think alcohol was fueling him. He was getting more disorganized, drinking a lot. Don't forget, he had escaped from a jail. He knew he could be recognized. His appearance was changing. He was kind of getting more gangly and trying not to look like old Ted. But I also think symbolically, it's that thing I was talking about where you're almost tired of hiding it and you just kind of want it to collapse already.
What's the title of Anne's new book, Gary?
I could have sworn she said it was called The Expert Witness.
Yeah, The Expert Witness. Yeah, that's it. And it's about her testifying in court trials. She even testified in the Menendez case.
Yeah, we're writing about it for our book that we're doing.
And by the way, we've got a fascinating book coming.
Oh yeah.
It's going to be a showstopper.
Everyone will have it. It'll be one of those books that's sort of standard because it's a collection of basically the different people in the foundation who have different areas of expertise are tackling. They each write a chapter or write ones together. So what you're going to have is this kind of collection of essays, each written by people with different expertise, and I think people are going to find it to be pretty fascinating. I have to tell you, I was just talking to one of our members earlier, Chris, about how the greatest thing about this project of working with Cold Case Foundation to do the book project as the editor with you is that we really realize how awesome our colleagues are. Like when I'm editing, I'm like, man, we have brilliant people in this foundation. And it's just like, it's easy for them, What are people saying here? Would love to see you get to interview BK. Oh, you never know. I still think one day I'm going to cross paths with that guy. I don't know if he's going to contact me. I don't know if I'm going to contact him. I don't know if I'm going to meet. I don't know, but
Later
it
in
just
the year.
feels like a destiny that our paths will cross at some point. I don't know.
I think you're gonna.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be.
It'll be like in a
And
streetcar named Desire when he says we had this
thank
date
you,
with
Mel.
each other from the beginning.
And
I think
everybody,
it's going to happen. Yeah.
and everybody, do we have the best mods on YouTube? I mean, Miss Sophia, Maui Girl, Mimi J2. Excuse me, I'm choking. Laura. I mean, just
They are awesome.
well, they're amazing. And Teresa M. I mean, they're amazing. And you folks, if you've not had a chance to thank these wonderful mods, please do so. I mean, seriously, Karen and I cannot ever thank them enough. We are so grateful. Let's see here. Holly, I'm behind and watching, so I don't know if you covered this, but can you please talk about the people that still believe he did not do this? Thanks. Santa? Yeah. Can I write a letter?
I would say the Nile is not just a river in Egypt, as they say. No, I think that look, if people want to believe something and they elevate it to the status of a faith, nothing is going to shake it. And I think the more interesting question is, why do they want to believe it? I think for some people it's pride at this point that they believed lip-diddlingly bizarre, things. But if you go back and you watch, thank God for a lot of people, this stuff gets buried in the cesspool of YouTube. But I think that there are a lot of people, if you dredged up some of the things they said, it would be embarrassing. I mean, some of these ideas were ridiculous. And, but fortunately, the attention span and memory of the world is very brief and it'll all be forgotten. But yeah, there were some pretty whacked out ideas out there about this guy. I mean, remember, Chris, the bending over backwards to find ways to explain how someone else did this?
Oh, yeah. It's endless, but that's okay, right? I mean, you and I both have learned.
Level weird, right? Yeah, weird.
Yeah, it is weird. It has recently been said publicly that BK was with two different friends during their overdose deaths. Do you think he committed more M's than this crime in Moscow?
Against a human? No.
Great question. Thank you.
We have no proof of that. I think he certainly had wondered about it or fantasized.
And he was probably enamored by the dead bodies.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think that he was an experimenter. I think he was intrigued. And I think that he probably, there were probably other potential targets that he thought about. I mean, for example, one thing I've always wanted to know is, whose ID did he have in a rubber glove in his possession? What was that about? Right? Yeah. Remember, if Anne were here, I would have reminded her that in the serial killer study, the #1 trophy taken by serial offenders were ID cards, driver's licenses, things like that. The interesting thing.
And there were a couple of those taken in this case, but we don't know who, what, when, where, why.
Well, think of the symbolism. I take away your license. I take away your identity. Right? It's a very powerful thing to take.
Yeah, great question. Okay, FBI black SUV. Absolutely love it. You are UC, which means you're undercover, code 5. Chris, was the glove that you found tested? Do you know who it belongs to? I don't know if the glove I found was the one that caused so much, discontent, where they mentioned a glove. When Karen and I, as you guys know the story, were up there, we walked by, we looked over, boom, there was a glove sitting right there. And it was as much as a shock to us as it was to you that I even found it. And what really tossed me, though, was the fact that was Thanksgiving Day. So it's almost a week later, 10 days later, whatever it was. And their cars were still there. That was not a good thing for me. personally, because the first thing we want to do whenever you're working a homicide scene, whether it's inside or out, is if you've got victims' vehicles, get them out of there like yesterday. And you want to work from the outside in. And you notice they were passing the cars and going into the apartment, into the house. No, that's not how you process a crime scene like this. You remove the cars and let another team process those cars, another evidence team, while you're now processing the house, because you may find correlating evidence. What if the suspect had gone into those cars, left fingerprints, DNA, blood transfer, any kind of forensic evidence? Well, if you're passing those cars for 10 days going into that house, guess what? You could be cross-contaminating that evidence. So you always want to, homicide 101, you start from the outside, you work your way in. And if a patrol officer walks up or anybody walks up and says, hey, I need to tell you something, what's up? You see that Range Rover over there? Yeah, that's the girl on the third floor. You go, time out. I need a tow truck. Get it here, and then you go secure it into a locked facility. And then you have your evidence folk. You just get on the phone and say, hey, there's a Range Rover over there. Go get it. Because you don't know. And look at Suzanne Morphew's case. That's a perfect example. The car is outside in her driveway or in her garage, and they find unknown DNA inside that car. Okay. Well, we don't know how that DNA got in there. It could have been anything. We definitely know, in my opinion, that a registered sex offender is not going to kill this woman and then drive her car back to her house and park it in her garage. That doesn't make sense, right? DLR does not look right. Okay. But that said, that's a good example of they towed that car almost immediately. They got it out of there, then they processed the house. And so that's how they're supposed to do it.
Well, that instinct you have, Chris, is important. That idea that, the Judge Judy rule, if it doesn't make sense, it isn't true. Right? You know what I'm saying? It's like that being bothered by the inexplicable, the little thing that people don't think is a big deal, but that the Columbo thing where you can't sleep because you can't make sense out of a. There's a famous scene in The Hound of the Baskervilles, the Sherlock Holmes story, where Henry Baskerville is complaining that one of his boots is missing, and someone says to him, "What's the big fuss? Why are you making such a big deal out of it?" And Sherlock says to him, "I think it is worth making a fuss out of." And he says, "Really? Why?" He says, "Because it's inexplicable." And it turns out it's extremely important because they're using the scent of the boot to train the dog to attack him, the hound to attack him. So it's the idea that those little things that we think are insignificant, if you can't make sense out of it, don't let it go. Make sure you can account for every single thing. Simple example of that is with Kohberger, where you had all these, the special types that were going on about how he didn't do it. All you had to do was ask the simple question: if he was in the park, how did the sheath with DNA on it that had a 1 in 27 octillion chance of being anybody except a first-degree relative of his wind up in the house? Was it carried in by drone? And the answer they would give you is, oh, he touched the sheath somewhere else, and to frame him, somebody brought it in and put it there. Okay, why would somebody do that? And they never could give you an answer. It was absurd. What is that? You know what I'm saying? So it's like talking to a person about, the flying spaghetti monster, or something. It's just a thing they believe that they just made up.
Yeah.
And it's like bizarre. It's like, but.
And you learn that you always carry your flashlight day or night. A homicide guy should always have their flashlight. They should always have a notebook with them 24/7, 365 if you're working a caper. And when you show up, the first thing you do is you turn that light on, even during the day. Okay. You can buy different types of lenses and those kind of things. Okay. But at night specifically, right? And you walk towards the scene with your head down and you're looking, for a blood trail, for an example. And I can't tell you how many times I'd show up and patrol would be like, oh, hey, it's tight. Don't worry about it. We shut it down almost immediately. And I'd hit the light and I'd say, well, you're standing in the blood, right? And they'd look down and go, what? And sure enough, it would be a blood trail coming from the house where the suspect may have transferred it from their shoes. And I had one caper where where I was looking down, I was going up a flight of stairs, and this was just a horrific, absolutely horrific crime scene.
Well, this was a pretty fascinating discussion, Chris. I think that because just because in the interest of time, I'm realizing it's 11 and tomorrow's a work day. But I think, Chris, that the take home point is you're going to hear probably, if what's in the press is to be believed, that the Patterson book is going to inject a lot of interest in the incel theory in an attempt to explain. Now, don't forget, this was written when it was thought there was going to be a trial, right? And before Dateline, I think, even. There must have been a whiff of truth in it because Ann Taylor got upset about the book. You remember? She talks about it in the filing where she also complained about Dateline. So I felt like a kind of tacit approval that something in it must have been true, although I don't know. Maybe it was just that it was going to put ideas out there that could sway people, true or not. But because there's going to be an injection of that, I guess that the sobering point that is being made here is we can't say whether he was interested in Elliot Rodger or inspired by that stuff, but you can't ignore the fact that the guy's phone had all the Bundy stuff. And the particular P he was looking at is just too consistent with Bundy's style of motivation and so forth to ignore, so that it might be like missing a few pages. Let's put it that way. If it focuses only on the incel thing, it would be missing that other part of the story. And but maybe it's in there. Maybe we don't know. Maybe that's not covered. We don't know. The book is not out yet. But I only know that the co-author, Vicki Ward, I think the name is, says that she's done 300 interviews, I think it was, and has spoke to everybody top to bottom, and I think walks away, talking about this incel stuff. So it's going to figure in somehow. We're not discrediting it, but I also think I don't see how to ignore the Bundy thing.
Well, what's going to happen when Bryan Kohberger says, you're all wrong? What happens then, right?
Well, say that to God himself.
That's the bottom line. And so we just did a whole presentation. It took us 2.5 hours. If you're just joining us, was he interested in incel? Yeah. Okay, fine. But we just did a comparative analysis that showed, if you can put a round peg in a square hole, round peg, square hole, get it? Okay. Try to stick them, it doesn't make sense, does it? Because there's no such thing as a round peg in a square hole, ever.
It's the inexplicable that can't be ignored.
Exactly. So people can say and do and write anything they want. That's the bottom line.
But however, it would make the Bundy stuff inexplicable.
Well, however, Ann Taylor didn't tell him that he was an incel. If she did, then she's the leaker. Okay, and the judge just found her. Okay.
Well,
you know what I mean? That these are all these things that we have to think about. What we did a behavioral analysis approach where I've worked over 300 murders. I applied my skill set to this presentation tonight. And I had a 90% solvability rate.
Yeah.
Don't ignore that number.
Yeah.
Okay. Meaning 9 out of 10 times I knew you did it. Now, whether or not I could arrest you, that's a different story. In fact, when I go to train law enforcement currently in the Cold Case Foundation, I'm going to train this PowerPoint presentation because I'm confident enough to believe that everything right now, the evidence is pointing. And I'm not going to take, some guy who's, writing a book. I could care less. What I want to know is what the truth is. And the truth right now is being held by Bryan Kohberger.
Right.
It's not being held by a New York Times bestseller. I'm sorry. You can buy it. You can believe it. I think it's a great purchase. Go get the book. It's going to be a good read. Okay. But you're going to come back to this show again at some point, and Bryan Kohberger is going to say, I read it. And somebody's going to say, really? Well, what did you think? And he's going to give his opinion. And if it's wrong, then guess what? You wasted your money. Okay? That's the bottom line. But it's your money. Spend it the way you want. I'd rather have you give me a super chat. I'm teasing. That's a joke. Okay? Let's see how loose people are.
I don't even know what a super chat is.
I'm teasing. They know me.
What's
I don't.
A super chat?
It's just a donation that people make. I would rather have you subscribe to my channel than anything else, and you guys know that from day one. Dr. Ram, let's see. I think he picked Dr. Ramsden because she has direct connection to BTK, and he was desperate to know what it was like to be a serial. Yeah, well, possibly. I don't know.
I don't speculate about what happened with Dr. Ramsden because that's a. I have to say that must be a very strange and awful position to be in, to be somebody
and
who's teaching.
Gray is the new black. Gray is the new black. Any way to buy Dr. B's and Taylor signed online. Can't get it at CrimeCon. Thank you for amazing panel and sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much for your kindness and asking about that, Gary. What do you think?
Look, I'm not going to be at CrimeCon. I went to.
You're not going?
CrimeCon because I was invited because I had appeared. I was on the show Violent Minds, Killers on Tape. So there was a panel, and that was a very interesting CrimeCon. That was the one at which Ethan's mother made public. Was speaking to one of the speakers. I think openly. There.
Ethan's mom.
Ethan's. Is that what I said? What did I say?
Yeah, I think you said one of the mothers, but that's okay.
Ethan's mom. I meant to say, forgive me, and I thought that was great, I enjoyed it. I met a lot of people. I signed a lot of things, but where I didn't get invited again. I'm not really sure why. I mean, I didn't drop a turd in the punch bowl or anything when I was there, but I think it has to do with the idea that I was invited because I was on a panel. And in the future, if maybe when we do this book, maybe there'll be a panel. But Chris, are you going?
Yes, Karen and I are going to go.
You're attending, so okay. And
right. But we're not doing anything. We're just going to walk around with our little name tags.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, it's a really.
Mine will say Pretzel Boy,
right.
Caution, hang bone on him on the head, so the dog plays with me.
Well, it is a really surreal experience because if you've never been, because you're walking around and you're meeting people that you've seen on the other side of the screen many times. A lot of people who are in the world of true crime are well known, and it's really and then there's also a lot of these people that have talked about you through the keyboard, but when they see you in person, they're like peaches and cream. It's really strange, so that's weird. You're like, oh, didn't you do a hit job on All My Friends yesterday? Hey, how are you? Sign my book. It's like, that's really weird and hypocritical. So there's a little of that. But what I like about it is the networking. You meet a lot of people who are victims' rights advocates. You meet a lot of people who are attorneys, law enforcement that worked on cases, authors, researchers. All that stuff is awesome. And in that way, it's a kind of important event. I also appreciated when I went that there wasn't a celebration of the criminals. There weren't people selling dopey gewgaws and shirts with Albert Fish on them and Unabomber hoodies and things like that. It was stickers. It was more like people who were pretty serious, and I appreciated that. It's not a bad thing. Although I wish I had been invited again, because I really loved meeting the having the people come up and sort of say, oh, I think your work has affected me in this way, and I loved that. I thought, because when you do these things, you send them out into the world and you don't know the effect, and it was just a uniformly kind of loving environment in that way. But Chris, I think what you're going to get is a lot of people going to come up and say how much they love your show, and your face
I love them.
to them. Yeah, you're going to see a ton of it.
You know me. I think it's going to be a great time.
Yeah, you're going to love it. You will. You get hooked on it. Believe me. It's a lot of fun.
What is this here? Maui Girl, question. What about those discount RA in Delphi despite 61 confessions?
I don't talk about Delphi.
Yeah.
I used to, and I gave it up because that's another world in which, that's another pool that needs chlorine, and I'm not going into it anymore. I said things, and I learned that that's a group you don't swim into, and it's over. Done. I don't talk about it. But you could talk about it, Chris.
No, I'm good. It's an amazing evening, everybody. We sure love you. We are grateful for everything. Thank you so much for being with us again for another marathon on Sunday nights. Great news. Karen's got a family member getting married in Michigan. So I'll be gone this week, headed to Michigan for an amazing wedding. Be back, but it's going to be a little primitive next week because I'm going to be broadcasting from my laptop. So I won't be in my office. However, we just want you guys to know, thank you for always being here. Also, if anybody is in Texas dealing with that tragedy, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
Oh my God.
Oh, I couldn't watch it the other night. I was, Karen will tell you, I was just shocked of all the little kids in the camps there. I mean, at least right now, 11 to 15 children are still missing. Let's please continue to pray for them and those families, that the good Lord will give them the strength that's necessary to hopefully to get them through it. But
Chris, also the families in the Idaho
case. I mean, just everybody, because this is the next big piece of this, the impact statements on the 23rd, which we will cover here, is going to be not only riveting, but it will be painful for the families, because at the conclusion of it, when the judge says, you're gone, they're going to walk out of there, and guess what happens? There's like this weight that drops, and then they realize potentially that the lights go away, the cameras go away, and they're left with the silence.
Right.
And
they didn't get the slow exposure therapy of having the trial go on a while to accept these things. It's just like abrupt. It's not the way it should operate. Chris, I have to say, and I don't mean it as a criticism, just as a point of interest, that the Patterson Ward book is called The Idaho Four. Mm-hmm. And I don't like that phrase. I don't like it. I never liked that phrase. I think it reduces the victims to like a number, like they're all lumped together. Like, I almost wish it was called, or any book was maybe called like Kaylee and Maddie and Xana and Ethan, something that kind of drove home that these were human beings. There's something about the Idaho Four that phrase that feels to me insensitive. Do you know what I mean by that? That it's a little like.
Well, maybe their marketing people are paying attention.
No, I think it's just a phrase that is caught on in the press, but I don't care for it. And I know a lot of people agree with me. I don't know. I don't think the families probably like it either. If I had to guess, it's not a sensitive thing to, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, see, people in the audience, they hate it also.
as they say in Hawaii and Maui, biakamai, pay attention, and we will see you on the next one. Aloha, everybody. Have a good evening.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away. You and me go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away.